Deadly rivalry. When the residents of the small town of Kitchener, Ontario, heard screams from a suburban neighborhood, many thought it was just the usual noise of an evening argument. But it turned out to be far more sinister. It was an evening that no one in this peaceful neighborhood would ever forget. The moment when a rivalry between sisters escalated into a tragedy, leaving the street covered in grim evidence. Earlier that summer, a new neighbor moved into a house on a quiet street in Kitchener. A young, attractive, and mysterious man named James Cross. From the very beginning, his appearance became a topic of conversation among the locals, but it especially caught the attention of two sisters, Megan and Rebecca Stewart. The sisters lived in neighboring houses and had always been inseparable, despite significant differences in their personalities. However, this bond soon turned into a destructive rivalry when James became the object of their mutual interest. Megan, the older sister, had charisma and confidence that made her popular among neighbors. Her younger sister, Rebecca, was more reserved and secretive, but extremely determined. James was the spark that ignited the fire between them, and as it turned out later, this fire would burn everyone around. At first, it was innocent flirting, which led to casual encounters by the mailbox, evening walks, and dinner invitations. But over time, their game took a dark turn. Each tried to outdo the other to win the attention of the new neighbor. Summer in Kitchener was coming to an end, but the tension between the sisters was only growing. Constant arguments over who deserved James's attention more turned into hidden aggression. Small quarrels escalated into open conflicts. No one in the neighborhood knew about the tension that was building in the sisters' homes, and no one expected what it would lead to. Everything changed late in the evening on August 22nd. Emergency services received a distress call from a neighbor who reported loud screams and sounds of a struggle coming from Megan's house. When the patrol car arrived at the scene, officers found the front door ajar, with an eerie silence inside. Lit only by the street lamp, the door swung on its hinges like an ominous sign of the coming darkness. The officers entered the house, and what they saw looked like a scene of real horror. In the living room, Megan's body lay on the floor, her face disfigured, and her hands bore signs of a struggle. Bloodstains were everywhere. Scattered items indicated a violent altercation. Everything pointed to the fact that this was not a simple random attack, but something deeply personal and extremely brutal. As investigators examined the crime scene, one thing caught their attention. A pendant engraved with the letter R was lying on the floor next to the body. This pendant belonged to Rebecca, and there was no doubt that she was somehow involved in the tragedy. The question was, how exactly? Investigators immediately became interested in the relationship between the sisters, and soon details of their troubled interactions began to emerge. Neighbors reported that in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, the relationship between the sisters had deteriorated sharply. Megan and Rebecca often argued in front of neighbors, and some even heard snippets of conversations hinting at jealousy and resentment. Someone claimed to have seen Rebecca storming out of Megan's house in anger just a day before the incident. Neighbors described these events as ordinary sibling quarrels, not imagining that they could lead to something so terrible. Rebecca was taken in for questioning. Investigators noticed that she had fresh scratches on her hands, which she explained as a result of falling during a walk in the woods. Her story sounded strained and unconvincing. In her house, investigators found items that seemed suspicious, clothes with stains resembling blood and a note mentioning James. It was clear that there had been an ongoing struggle between the sisters, and James was the catalyst. James Cross, at the center of this tragic rivalry, was in shock. He admitted that the sisters did pay him a lot of attention, and acknowledged that he might have inadvertently contributed to their disagreements. He was polite and considerate to both, not realizing how deep their jealousy and animosity toward each other ran. Investigators tried to determine if he could be involved in the incident, but he had an alibi. At the time of the crime, he was at work in a local cafe, confirmed by surveillance footage. Rebecca denied her involvement, insisting that she loved her sister and would never harm her. However, the evidence said otherwise. Rebecca's fingerprints were found on kitchen knives, and her DNA was discovered on Megan's body. Investigators also found messages on her phone that clearly indicated the growing hostility between the sisters. In one of them, Rebecca wrote, "She always takes what should be mine. This time, I won't give in." As the investigation continued, the residents of Kitchener were in shock. Their quiet neighborhood, where everyone knew each other, had become the scene of a horrific crime. Neighbors who once saw the sisters as ordinary women could not believe that their rivalry had ended in such a tragedy. No one expected that the struggle for the attention of a new neighbor could lead to the death of one of them. The town, which until then had not experienced serious crimes, now lived under a shadow of fear and confusion. The next day, after Megan's body was found, investigators came to Rebecca's house with a search warrant. In her bedroom, they found a diary filled with angry entries about her sister. Rebecca wrote about her hatred for Megan, how she was tired of living in her shadow. She detailed how Megan was always first, in school, in relationships, even in their parents' love. But now, with James's arrival, Rebecca had decided she would no longer step aside. However, the most shocking discovery awaited them at the end of the diary. The last entries were made shortly before the tragedy and were clearly manic in nature. Rebecca described her plans, how she wanted to get rid of the obstacle, and this became what investigators referred to as clear premeditation. She wrote about feeling trapped in a cage next to her sister and how she longed for freedom. These entries became key evidence in the case against her. Investigators continued to gather evidence, but it was already obvious that their version of events was coming together. Everything indicated that Rebecca, driven by her jealousy and hatred, had decided to commit a crime against her sister. She carefully planned her attack, choosing a moment when Megan was home alone. The crime scene suggested that Megan had tried to defend herself, but her strength was not enough to withstand her sister's fury. Meanwhile, the media quickly picked up the story, making it one of the most discussed in Canada. Newspaper headlines were filled with phrases like "deadly sister rivalry" and "jealousy leads to tragedy." TV screens flashed images of the quiet street, now cordoned off with police tape, and houses that seemed abandoned and gloomy. Kitchener was no longer the peaceful town it once was. Now it was a place where destructive emotions led to a tragic end. Deeper into darkness. The town of Kitchener was still reeling from the shocking crime that shattered the peaceful flow of life in the small suburb. The incident seemed to drag everyone connected to Megan and Rebecca into a vortex of anxiety and suspicion. The further investigators progressed in their investigation, the more questions arose, and the less clarity remained. One truth only grew stronger with each passing day. Nothing in this case was as it seemed. The investigation team worked tirelessly. They took on the task of reconstructing the sequence of events that led to the tragedy. To do this, they needed to examine every aspect of the sisters' lives in detail, and the deeper they dug, the darker the picture of their relationship became. Meanwhile, journalists continued their attempts to uncover every detail to support sensational headlines. James Cross's character became the focus of scrutiny, and suddenly it turned out that he was far from the harmless person he initially appeared to be. Facts began to surface in the tabloids that cast James in a questionable light. Several years ago, he had lived in Montreal, where he was involved in a failed relationship that ended in legal proceedings. The woman he dated sued him, accusing him of manipulation and psychological abuse. Although the case did not go to court, his reputation had already been tarnished. James did not deny these accusations, but insisted that everything was exaggerated and misinterpreted. Nevertheless, this fact left investigators wondering, could something similar have happened in his relationships with the sisters? Investigators began to scrutinize all contacts and conversations James had with Megan and Rebecca. In the process of examining his phone and messages, they found that his communications with both sisters were clearly flirtatious, and in some cases, he intentionally fueled their rivalry. One of his messages to Megan read, "Rebecca will never understand what I feel for you. You are special, and I will always be there." Meanwhile, just a day before the crime, he sent a similar message to Rebecca, stating, "Megan is getting too carried away, but only you truly understand me." These facts made him not just a passive witness, but an active participant in the emotional chaos brewing between the sisters. At the same time, investigators began to delve deeper into Rebecca's past. They spoke to her school friends and former colleagues to understand who this woman really was. A general picture began to emerge. Rebecca had always lived in the shadow of her older sister. All her accomplishments seemed insignificant compared to Megan's achievements. Her classmates recalled how Megan was always the star of school events, while Rebecca stood on the sidelines, watching her sister's triumphs. It wasn't just jealousy, it was deep-seated, years-long resentment fueled by a sense of injustice. One particularly dark detail was the discovery of an old-school photograph in which Megan stood surrounded by friends, smiling and radiant, while Rebecca, in the background, looked at her with an expression later described by many as a mix of bitterness and envy. Investigators realized that their story had begun long before James arrived. He was merely the catalyst that led to the inevitable. The investigation entered a new phase when the investigators decided to conduct a series of psychological evaluations of Rebecca. The psychologist working with her found clear signs of suppressed emotions, anger, and guilt, which combined into a destructive cocktail. She spoke of feeling trapped, as if she had been chained to her sister her entire life, someone she was supposed to love, but could not escape the hatred. Her words took on special significance in light of the diary entries that had been found. However, there were those who believed in Rebecca's innocence. Her friends insisted that she was incapable of such an act. One of her friends, Sarah, told investigators that Rebecca had never been violent. In fact, she was kind and caring, albeit somewhat withdrawn. Sarah insisted that Rebecca had always loved her sister despite their disagreements. But investigators could not ignore the evidence that pointed to the contrary. Meanwhile, Rebecca's attorneys decided to play the card of unstable mental health. They argued that the pressure from Megan and her constant superiority had caused Rebecca to lose control. However, there were other theories, including the possibility that someone else had taken advantage of the situation to settle scores. This theory gained support among those who believed that James Cross was not as innocent as he seemed. Investigators decided to place James under surveillance. They monitored his movements, his communications, and even installed a wiretap on his phone. A few days later, they received information that made them reconsider the situation. In one conversation, which took place shortly after the crime, James spoke with an unknown person and mentioned that everything got out of control. He also said that he hadn't expected things to go this far. This gave investigators reason to believe that he might have been more deeply involved in the escalation of the conflict between the sisters than previously thought. Shortly afterward, James was called in for a second interview. This time, the questions focused not only on his relationships with the sisters, but also on his past, his dealings in Montreal, and what had really happened in the days leading up to the crime. James, who had initially seemed calm and confident, began to grow nervous. He stumbled over his statements, denied having anything to do with stirring up the conflict between Megan and Rebecca, but his behavior aroused even more suspicion. The gathered facts began to form a new picture. Investigators realized that James might not only have enjoyed the attention of both women, but also intentionally fueled their rivalry. His flirting, ambiguous messages, and emotional manipulation of the sisters may have been the spark that ignited the fire. But was it a deliberate attempt to push them to the edge, or did he simply lose control of the situation? The residents of Kitchener didn't know what to think. Some blamed James as the main culprit in the tragedy. Others blamed Rebecca, while still others believed it was a chain of tragic coincidences. Meanwhile, rumors continued to spread, and every new detail of the case became a topic for discussion. The town, where people once knew each other and trusted their neighbors, now lived in a state of constant vigilance and fear. The investigation continued to go deeper. Secrets that were uncovered in this case made even the most experienced detectives question their understanding of what was happening. Suddenly, the name of another person surfaced. Emily, James's former girlfriend from Montreal. She contacted the investigators after learning about the crime from the news, claiming that she had important information that could shed light on James Cross's true character. Emily said that James was not just a manipulator, but someone who enjoyed making people suffer. She claimed that James loved the feeling of power, especially over those who were vulnerable. She remembered how he intentionally pitted her against her friends, causing them to argue, and then watched as they tried to mend their relationships. Emily insisted that if James was at the center of the conflict between the two sisters, it was no accident. Investigators began to consider the possibility that James might have been indirectly responsible for Megan's death. Perhaps he did not physically commit the act, but his manipulations and intentional provocations led one of the sisters to snap. The question was how far he was willing to go to satisfy his ambitions and thirst for power. Meanwhile, Rebecca was in custody, and her condition was becoming increasingly unstable. She no longer denied that there had been conflicts between her and Megan, but insisted that she could not remember what had happened on the night of the crime. Psychologists spoke of possible amnesia caused by shock or severe emotional trauma. However, the investigators could not rely solely on her words. They needed solid evidence. Their attention once again turned to James. They decided to search his house, hoping to find something that would shed light on his true role in this story. In his house, investigators found numerous photographs, pictures capturing moments of his meetings with Megan and Rebecca. In some of the photos, the sisters looked happy, while in others, their faces showed tension and anger. Among these photos was one that particularly interested the investigators. In it, Megan and Rebecca stood face to face, clearly in the middle of an argument, while James stood to the side, watching them with a slight smile on his face. This photo became a symbol of everything that had happened between them. James, enjoying his influence over the two women, and the sisters, who had become puppets in his hands. Investigators began to understand that they might be dealing with a far more complex case than just a crime driven by jealousy. It was a story of manipulation, psychological abuse, and destructive emotions that ultimately led to a tragedy. New revelations. The investigation continued, and investigators realized that each new discovery only made the picture of what happened more complicated. It seemed they were getting closer to the truth, but with every new fact, they became more entangled in the web of lies and manipulations woven by Megan, Rebecca, and James. New details emerged, forcing the investigators to view the events from a completely different perspective. One of these revelations came from Emily, James's ex-girlfriend. After reaching out to the authorities, investigators started to dig deeper into his past connections and relationships. A number of stories began to surface that had previously escaped their attention. It turned out that Emily wasn't the only one who had a negative experience with James. They found several other women who described his behavior as manipulative and threatening. Particularly noteworthy was an interview with a woman named Lisa, who lived in Vancouver. Lisa told investigators that her relationship with James began romantically, but soon turned into a nightmare. Just like with Emily, James began isolating her from her friends and family, eventually displaying signs of aggressive behavior. Lisa described moments when he seemed to take pleasure in her fear and despair, as if he thrived on her weakness. These statements strengthened the investigators' belief that James was not just a manipulator, but someone capable of pushing anyone to the brink. Investigators carefully analyzed his behavior pattern. First, James would charm his target, then begin to control them, gradually pushing them into despair and dependency. This approach allowed him to use people around him, turning them into instruments of his will. In the case of the sisters, he acted in the same way, gaining the attention of both, making them compete for his favor, and enjoying how they fell under his control. New information also came from Megan and Rebecca's neighbor, a woman named Nora who lived across the street. She remembered a detail that had previously seemed insignificant but now might play an important role. A week before the crime, she saw James leaving Megan's house late at night. He looked agitated and was hiding something under his jacket. The next day, Megan and Rebecca had another big argument, which many neighbors overheard. In Nora's opinion, these events were connected, and she was sure that James had somehow provoked that argument. Shortly after Nora's statement, investigators decided to check surveillance footage from cameras located near the sisters and James's houses. The cameras captured several encounters between James and both women over the past month. These meetings often had a tense atmosphere, and in some footage, James could be seen behaving aggressively, pointing fingers and yelling. In one of the recordings, made just a few days before the crime, Rebecca was seen running out of James's house in tears. Investigators grew increasingly suspicious that James had manipulated the situation until it spiraled out of control. He fueled the rivalry between the sisters, and it was possible that he had pushed Rebecca to a state where she committed the crime. They also considered that he might have used Rebecca's emotional state for his own purposes, knowing that her jealousy and resentment toward her sister could be turned against her. Meanwhile, Rebecca's attorneys began pushing the version that their client was not only a victim of circumstances but also a victim of sophisticated manipulation. They argued that James was essentially the orchestrator of this tragedy, while the sisters were mere pawns in his game. This theory, though not fully proven, began gaining traction among journalists and the public, and people started to see James not as a victim, but as the dark force behind the entire story. Investigators continued gathering evidence, and another discovery became a crucial turning point. On James's phone, they found a message sent to him from an unknown number the day before the crime. It read, "She's ready. You've done your part. Now just wait." This message brought a new wave of suspicion. Who could have sent it? And who was it referring to? Megan or Rebecca? These questions became a new puzzle for the investigators, and they began searching for the source of the message. Tracking the number led them to someone named Mark, a person James knew from his days in Montreal. Mark turned out to have a shady past, being involved in several criminal activities. Investigators began to suspect that James might have reached out to him for help in influencing the situation with the sisters. Perhaps Mark had helped him devise a plan to ignite the rivalry between Megan and Rebecca, so he could then just watch them destroy each other. Mark was found and brought in for questioning. At first, he denied any involvement, claiming he hadn't seen James in a long time and had nothing to do with the case. However, under the weight of evidence, as well as data retrieved from his phone, investigators were able to prove that he had been actively communicating with James over the past month. Furthermore, their correspondence had a clearly criminal tone, discussing ways to manipulate people to make them do what James wanted. These new pieces of information were a major breakthrough. Investigators began to suspect that Megan's death might have been the result of a carefully planned conspiracy, the goal of which was not only to destroy her life, but also to make Rebecca take the blame. It was possible that James and Mark used her psychological instability and years of accumulated resentment to push her toward committing the crime. James was detained again for questioning, but this time he was questioned not as a witness, but as a suspect. This time, his confidence was gone. He denied any involvement, claiming that Mark acted independently and that he had nothing to do with Megan's death. However, investigators didn't believe him. There were too many coincidences, too much evidence pointing to his involvement in this dark scheme. Meanwhile, Rebecca was in a state of deep emotional crisis. Her attorneys tried to prove that she had been manipulated and that her actions were the result of a mental disorder exacerbated by James's pressure. Her psychological state was deteriorating, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to recall the events of that night. She claimed to remember only fragments, screams, shadows, faces. But one thing she was sure of: James was there. She saw him, and he was saying something to her that she couldn't remember. As investigators tried to piece together all the parts of the puzzle, they began to consider yet another theory. Perhaps Mark wasn't just an accomplice, but the one who actually carried out the plan, delivering the fatal blow to Megan while James provided an alibi. This theory would explain why James seemed so calm in the days following the crime. He knew he had someone who would take care of the dirty work. The residents of Kitchener were stunned by the new facts. Their perception of this as a simple family rivalry was shattered. Now it looked like a carefully planned crime, with every detail thought through and every emotion used for selfish purposes. James, initially seen as a victim, was now perceived as the mastermind whose actions led to the tragedy. The investigation continued, and investigators knew they had little time. They needed to gather all the evidence to hold James and Mark accountable before they found a way to escape justice. They worked day and night, analyzing data, questioning witnesses, and examining every detail that could shed light on what had happened on that fateful night. Court and resolution. After weeks of investigation, rumors, and accusations, the case of Megan Stewart's death finally reached the courtroom. Prosecutors prepared an extensive case in which James Cross and Mark each played a role in the tragedy that befell the Stewart family. The town of Kitchener anxiously awaited the resolution, hoping that the truth would finally be established and that the responsible parties would face justice. The trial began with the prosecutor's opening statement. in which he detailed the scheme devised by James and Mark. According to the prosecution, James Cross not only manipulated the sisters' emotions, but deliberately pushed their relationship to the breaking point, intentionally provoking rivalry and jealousy. He used Mark as his enforcer to directly influence both women, leading them down a destructive path that ultimately led to Megan's death. The courtroom was presented with a large body of evidence: text messages between James and Mark, photographs, surveillance footage, and witness statements. The prosecutor presented testimony from neighbors such as Nora, who saw James leaving Megan's house on the night before the tragedy. She also described how the sisters' relationship often became more strained after his visits. These accounts were supported by surveillance footage that showed James meeting with the sisters, his aggressive behavior, and his manipulative tactics. One piece of evidence that particularly impacted those present was a video recording of Rebecca running out of James's house in tears just days before the crime. This was a clear sign that James had been intentionally playing on the emotions of the women, making them feel worse and worse. Psychological evaluations conducted at the request of Rebecca's defense confirmed that she was in a state of severe emotional stress, making her extremely vulnerable to manipulation. When it was the defense's turn, Rebecca's attorneys portrayed her as the victim of a complex game orchestrated by James and Mark. The defense insisted that Rebecca would never have committed the crime if not for the constant pressure and influence from James. They provided testimony from her friends and colleagues, who described her as a kind and caring woman, always willing to help others. The psychologist working with Rebecca explained that her actions were the result of prolonged psychological abuse that had pushed her to the breaking point. Emily, James's former girlfriend, also took the stand, describing her relationship with him and how he used her fears and weaknesses to control her. She described in detail how James took pleasure in manipulating her emotions, isolating her from her friends and family. Her testimony helped create a picture of James, not as a victim of circumstances, but as a cunning manipulator who would stop at nothing to satisfy his need for power over others. When it was Mark's turn to testify, he attempted to deny his role in the crime, claiming that he did not know James's true intentions. However, prosecutors presented text messages between them, discussing specific actions intended to create conflict between the sisters. One of the key messages sent by Mark sounded like an admission. "She's ready. You've done your part. Now just wait." This message became a crucial piece of evidence that James and Mark had acted together, planning to use Rebecca's emotional state for their purposes. The trial lasted several weeks. Throughout this period, the public followed the proceedings with unrelenting interest. Numerous articles appeared in the press, discussing different versions of what had happened. The focus was not only on the relationship between the sisters, but also on James's role, which seemed to play a pivotal part in the tragedy. With each new witness and each new piece of evidence, the picture became clearer. This was not just a crime driven by jealousy, but a carefully planned act aimed at destroying lives. During the trial, it became evident that James Cross was not just a puppet master enjoying his control over the sisters, but also someone who planned to gain personal benefit from the situation. One of the motives considered by the prosecution was financial gain. It turned out that Megan possessed a significant sum of money that could have passed to Rebecca in the event of her death. And in turn, James could gain access to these funds by exploiting Rebecca's trust and emotional dependency. When James took the stand, his demeanor changed dramatically. He was no longer the confident man who seemed to be in control of the situation. His lawyers tried to present him as a victim of circumstances, arguing that he could not have foreseen where his relationships with the sisters would lead. However, witness testimony, text messages, and surveillance footage told a different story. James was not just a participant in the events. He was the instigator and director who guided the actions of everyone else involved. The trial concluded with a verdict. James Cross was found guilty of intentional incitement, leading to a crime and manipulations that resulted in Megan Stewart's death. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His actions were deemed deliberate and cruel, aimed at using people for his own purposes, regardless of the consequences. Mark was also found guilty of complicity and received a lengthy prison sentence. As for Rebecca, her fate was less severe, but still tragic. The court found her guilty of involuntary manslaughter, taking into account all the circumstances and her psychological state at the time of the crime. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison with the possibility of early release. The psychological pressure she had endured from James was considered a mitigating factor, but the court could not fully absolve her of responsibility for her sister's death. After the sentencing, the town of Kitchener slowly began to recover. Residents hoped that justice had finally been served and that those responsible had received their due punishment. But the scars left by this tragedy remained. Many of those who knew the sisters and had witnessed their relationship could not believe that things had gone this far. The story of two sisters who became victims of manipulation had forever changed the town and its people. The Stewart family went through difficult times. Megan and Rebecca's parents did not attend most of the court sessions, preferring to keep their distance from the public spotlight. They had lost one daughter and effectively lost the other, and their grief was beyond words. After the trial, they moved away from Kitchener, trying to find solace elsewhere, far from the memories that haunted them at every turn. James Cross's story and his destructive influence served as a lesson for many. It was a story of how one person could ruin lives by playing on the weaknesses and emotions of others. Manipulation, psychological abuse, and the thirst for power. All of this led to a tragedy that could have been avoided if someone had noticed the signs of danger earlier. The public began to discuss the issue of psychological abuse and manipulation more actively, demanding tougher laws and greater attention to victims of such crimes. Rebecca, serving her sentence, began undergoing therapy. Her lawyers and family hoped that she could recover and return to a normal life despite everything that had happened. She often spoke of her regret and how, if she could, she would change everything. Psychologists noted that she was beginning to understand her situation and was trying to find a path to healing, though the process was long and painful. The trial was over, but the consequences of this story would continue to affect the lives of those caught up in this terrible whirlpool of events. Kitchener, a small town once known for its peace and safety, was no longer the same. People became more cautious with new acquaintances, viewed strangers with suspicion, and discussed the importance of being attentive to the emotional state of their loved ones. This story became a symbol of the destructive consequences of manipulation and psychological abuse. It showed how far a person could go when their emotions and life were controlled by someone else. James Cross, who tried to exploit people's weaknesses and fears, ultimately became a victim of his own ambitions. But the price for his games was too high: shattered lives, lost loved ones, and the endless guilt that would haunt the remaining participants in this tragedy. Rebecca hoped that one day she could free herself from the horror that consumed her. She wrote letters to her parents, asking for forgiveness, but received no response. She knew that the only thing left for her was to try to find the strength within herself to move forward and not let the past destroy her completely. She knew the road would be long, but hoped that someday she would find redemption. Saffron Callahan was a force to be reckoned with. From a young age, she exhibited a fierce determination and an insatiable curiosity that set her apart from her peers. Born to Liam and Fiona Callahan, Saffron's early years were marked by instability. Her father's struggle with alcoholism and her mother's subsequent depression created a tumultuous home environment. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Saffron developed a resilience and drive that would shape her future. At school, Saffron excelled academically and socially. She was editor of the school newspaper, captain of the debate team, and a straight-A student. Her teachers often remarked on her ability to see through facades and uncover hidden truths, a skill that would later draw her to journalism. When her parents divorced during her sophomore year of college, Saffron found herself at a crossroads. Unwilling to choose between her parents and needing a stable environment to continue her studies, she accepted her Uncle Everett and Aunt Constance's offer to live with them. Moving into the Callahan family home was a turning point for Saffron. For the first time, she experienced the stability and support she had always craved. Everett, in particular, took an interest in nurturing her talents, often engaging her in discussions about politics, business, and current events. Everett Callahan was the epitome of the American dream. At 45, He had built a real estate empire from the ground up, transforming it into one of the most successful firms in the Northeast. His magnetic personality and sharp business acumen had earned him both admirers and enemies in equal measure. Standing tall with salt and pepper hair, Everett cut an imposing figure. He had a way of commanding any room he entered, his charm and wit drawing people in like moths to a flame. Everett's childhood had been markedly different from his current life of luxury. Growing up in a working-class family, he had learned the value of hard work and ambition from an early age. His father, a construction worker, and his mother, a waitress, had instilled in him a drive to succeed that bordered on obsession. After putting himself through college and business school, Everett had thrown himself into the world of real estate. His ability to spot potential where others saw only dilapidation had quickly set him apart from his peers. Within a decade, he had transformed the company from a small local firm into a regional powerhouse. To the outside world, Everett appeared to have it all: a beautiful wife, 2 children, a successful business, and a reputation as a pillar of the community. He served on the boards of several charities and was a generous donor to local causes. However, beneath this perfect exterior lurked a restlessness that Everett struggled to quell. Despite his outward success, Everett battled with a persistent feeling of emptiness. The thrill of closing deals and amassing wealth had begun to wane, leaving him searching for new sources of excitement. Everett's relationship with his niece, Saffron, added another layer of complexity to his life. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who shared his drive and ambition. As she grew older, he found himself drawn to her in ways that both excited and disturbed him. The line between avuncular affection and something more sinister began to blur, setting the stage for the tragedy that was to come. It was a crisp autumn evening when Saffron's world turned upside down. She had been working late at the local newspaper, where she had secured an internship, when she realized she had left her laptop charger at home. Knowing her aunt and uncle were supposed to be at a charity gala that evening, she decided to swing by the house to retrieve it. As Saffron pulled into the driveway, she noticed her uncle's car parked in its usual spot. Thinking he must have decided to skip the gala, she entered the house quietly, not wanting to disturb him if he was working in his study. The house was eerily quiet as Saffron made her way upstairs. As she approached her room, she heard sounds coming from her uncle's bedroom. Concern and curiosity warred within her as she inched closer to the partially open door. What Saffron saw through the crack in the door would haunt her for the rest of her short life. There was her Uncle Everett, locked in a passionate embrace with a woman who was decidedly not her Aunt Constance. Saffron's mind reeled as she tried to process what she was witnessing. The uncle she had idolized, the man she had seen as a paragon of virtue and success, was nothing but a common cheater. Backing away from the door, Saffron's foot caught on a loose floorboard, causing a loud creak. Her heart stopped as she heard the sudden silence from the bedroom. Without thinking, she dashed down the stairs and out of the house, barely remembering to close the front door behind her. Once in her car, Saffron sat trembling, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Shock, anger, and a strange sense of betrayal fought for dominance. She had always thought of her uncle as invincible, above the petty weaknesses of ordinary men. To see him engaged in such a tawdry affair shattered the pedestal she had placed him on. In the days that followed, Saffron found herself obsessively analyzing every interaction she had ever had with her uncle. She began to see hidden meanings in casual touches, to reinterpret compliments and gestures of affection through a new, unsettling lens. The knowledge of Everett's affair became a poisonous secret, eating away at Saffron from the inside. She found herself unable to meet her uncle's eyes at the dinner table, flinching away from his usual affectionate pat on the shoulder. Her aunt noticed the change in Saffron's behavior, but attributed it to stress from her internship and upcoming job search. Little did anyone know that this discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Veronica Ashworth was not the type of woman one would typically imagine as the other woman in an extramarital affair. At 38, she was a respected art curator at the Museum of Art in Hartford. Her professional demeanor and sophisticated taste made her a favorite among the city's elite, who often sought her advice on building their private collections. With her sharp features and penchant for minimalist designer clothing, Veronica cut a striking figure. She was intelligent, cultured, and fiercely independent, qualities that had initially drawn Everett to her. Their paths had first crossed at a museum fundraiser 2 years prior. Everett had been immediately captivated by Veronica's wit and her refreshingly direct manner. For her part, Veronica had found in Everett a man who could keep up with her intellectually, something she had found lacking in many of her previous relationships. What had begun as a meeting of minds soon evolved into a physical relationship. They would meet in upscale hotels during business trips or steal moments together when Everett claimed to be working late. Veronica, who had sworn off serious relationships after a painful divorce in her early 30s, found herself falling for the charismatic real estate mogul. However, Veronica was not naive. She knew Everett was married and had no illusions about their relationship. She told herself that she was satisfied with the stolen moments and passionate encounters, that she didn't need or want the complications of a full-time relationship. Yet, as the affair continued, Veronica found herself increasingly dissatisfied with the secrecy and limitations of their arrangement. She began to hope, against her better judgment, that Everett might leave his wife for her. Little did Veronica know that her affair with Everett was about to be thrust into the spotlight in the most tragic way possible. The discovery of their relationship would set off a chain reaction that would end in murder, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. In the weeks following her discovery of Everett's affair, Saffron found herself spiraling into a dark obsession. Her once bright future seemed to dim as she became consumed with thoughts of her uncle and the mysterious other woman. Saffron's work at the newspaper began to suffer as she spent countless hours scouring social media and local event photos, trying to identify the woman she had glimpsed in Everett's bedroom. Her search became all-consuming, causing her to neglect her responsibilities and withdraw from her friends and family. As she delved deeper into her investigation, Saffron began to experience a disturbing shift in her emotions. The initial shock and disgust at her uncle's infidelity gradually gave way to a complex mix of jealousy and desire. She found herself imagining what it would be like to be the object of Everett's illicit affections, to be the one he risked everything for. These thoughts both thrilled and horrified Saffron. She knew they were wrong, that the very idea of being attracted to her uncle was taboo. Yet she couldn't shake the growing fixation. She began to pay more attention to her appearance when she knew Everett would be around, wearing more makeup and choosing outfits that accentuated her figure. Saffron's behavior didn't go unnoticed. Her Aunt Constance expressed concern over her niece's sudden mood swings and distracted demeanor. Everett, too, seemed to sense the change in Saffron, often catching her staring at him with an unreadable expression. One evening, as Saffron was helping Constance prepare dinner, she overheard a phone conversation between Everett and someone he called V. The intimate tone of his voice left no doubt in Saffron's mind that this was the other woman. Hearing the affection in her uncle's voice as he spoke to his lover ignited a fierce jealousy in Saffron that she could barely contain. That night, alone in her room, Saffron made a decision. She would expose Everett's affair, but not out of any sense of moral duty or concern for her aunt. Though Saffron's motivations were far more selfish and twisted, she convinced herself that by revealing the affair, she would be removing the other woman from the equation, leaving her free to pursue her own relationship with Everett. In her increasingly delusional state, Saffron began to reinterpret every interaction she'd ever had with her uncle. The proud smile he'd given her at her high school graduation, the long conversations they'd had about her future, the comforting hug he'd offered when she was upset. All of these took on new, inappropriate meanings in Saffron's mind. As she formulated her plan to confront Everett, Saffron's guilt and shame were overwhelmed by a toxic mix of desire and a misguided sense of entitlement. She had convinced herself that she understood Everett in a way no one else did, that they shared a special connection that transcended their familial relationship. Little did Saffron know that her descent into obsession was leading her down a path from which there would be no return. The once promising young journalist was now on a collision course with tragedy, driven by desires she barely understood, and a jealousy that would ultimately prove fatal. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Saffron decided it was time to put her plan into action. Saffron found Everett in his study, poring over some blueprints for a new development. She knocked on the open door, her heart pounding so loudly Everett looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile that made Saffron's knees weak. "Everett, is it all right if I talk to you about something?" Saffron's voice quavered slightly as she spoke. Noticing her serious tone, Everett's expression shifted to one of concern. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Saffron closed the door behind her and took a deep breath. I know about your affair, Uncle Everett. The color drained from Everett's face as he stared at his niece in shock. I saw you that night you were supposed to be at the gala. I came home and saw you with her. She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say next. And I want you to know that it's okay. I understand. Everett's shock turned to confusion. This isn't something you should be involved in. It's complicated, and it's not what you think. Taking a step closer to her uncle, Saffron's voice dropped to a near whisper. I think it's exactly what I think. You're not happy with Aunt Constance. You need someone who truly understands you. Someone who can match your passion and ambition. With each word, she moved closer, until she was standing directly in front of Everett's desk. Everett stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Saffron, this conversation needs to end right now. You're my niece, and what you're implying is completely inappropriate. But Saffron was too far gone in her delusion to heed the warning in Everett's voice. In a move that would forever alter the course of both their lives, she circled the desk and pressed herself against him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Everett looked down at his niece, a mix of emotions playing across his face. Shock, anger, and something darker that Saffron mistook for desire. Then, with a forceful push, he shoved her away from him. What do you think you're doing? Have you lost your mind? The rejection hit Saffron like a physical blow. She stumbled backwards, her face flushing with humiliation and anger. Neither of them could have known in that moment how this confrontation would set in motion a series of events that would end in tragedy. The lines had been crossed and there was no going back. In the days following the confrontation, an uneasy tension settled over the Callahan household. Saffron avoided Everett as much as possible, shame and anger warring within her. Everett, for his part, seemed determined to pretend nothing had happened, maintaining a facade of normalcy that only heightened Saffron's distress. It was on a Friday evening, nearly 2 weeks after the incident in the study, that everything changed. Constance had taken the children to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving Everett and Saffron alone in the house. Saffron had been planning to spend the evening out with friends, a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. As she was heading out the door, Everett called out to her, "Saffron, can we talk for a moment?" Everett gestured for her to join him in the living room. "I think we need to clear the air about what happened." Saffron sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her body tense. "I'd rather not talk about it. Can we just forget it ever happened?" Everett sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think we can." Something in his tone made Saffron look up, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. What she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. Gone was the anger and disgust she had expected. Instead, she saw a mixture of guilt, desire, and resignation that mirrored her own conflicted emotions. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. Everett moved closer, his voice low and intense. "This is wrong, Saffron. We both know it's wrong. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." What followed was a passionate, frenzied encounter that left them both breathless and filled with equal parts exhilaration and shame. As they lay tangled together on the sofa, the full weight of what they had done began to settle over them. In the weeks that followed, Everett and Saffron engaged in a dangerous dance of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. They both knew what they were doing was wrong, that it could destroy their family if anyone ever found out. But the thrill of their forbidden relationship, combined with the genuine affection and understanding they shared, proved too addictive to give up. Little did they know that their illicit affair was building towards a catastrophic conclusion. The web of lies and betrayal they were weaving would soon unravel with deadly consequences. As Everett and Saffron's secret relationship intensified, the atmosphere in the Callahan home grew increasingly strained. Constance, though unaware of the true nature of the situation, sensed that something was amiss. She noticed the furtive glances between her husband and niece, the way they seemed to tense up when in the same room together. The situation came to a head one Saturday afternoon when Constance walked in on Everett and Saffron in what appeared to be an intense, whispered argument. They sprang apart as soon as they noticed her, but Constance had seen enough to arouse her suspicions. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice laced with concern and a hint of accusation. Saffron mumbled something about a disagreement over a business proposal before hurrying from the room. Everett attempted to smooth things over, claiming he had been giving Saffron advice about her career prospects, but Constance remained unconvinced. From that moment on, Constance began to pay closer attention to her husband and niece's interactions. She noticed how they always seemed to be in the same room, how their conversations would abruptly cease when she entered. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to grow. As the weeks passed, the tension in the house became palpable. Family dinners, once a time of lively conversation and laughter, became stilted affairs filled with awkward silences and forced small talk. Constance's attempts to draw out what was wrong were met with deflection from Everett and evasion from Saffron. Unbeknownst to all, the carefully constructed facade of the Callahan family was beginning to crack. The truth, with all its ugly implications, was threatening to burst forth, and when it did, the consequences would be devastating. As autumn gave way to winter, Everett Callahan found himself trapped in a prison of his own making. The initial thrill of his affair with Saffron had long since faded, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. The pressure was coming from all sides. Veronica, unaware of his dalliance with Saffron, had begun to push for more commitment. She wanted him to leave Constance, to start a new life with her. Her patience was wearing thin, and her threats to expose their affair were becoming more frequent and more serious. At home, Constance's suspicions had not abated. Her once trusting nature had been replaced by a quiet watchfulness that set Everett's nerves on edge. He caught her checking his phone when she thought he wasn't looking, noticed her questioning glances when he came home late from work. But it was Saffron who posed the greatest threat. What had begun as a misguided infatuation on her part had evolved into something far more dangerous. She had become possessive, jealous not just of Constance but of Veronica as well. Her demands for Everett's time and attention were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. One particularly tense evening, after a close call where Constance had nearly walked in on them in a compromising position, Everett tried to end things with Saffron. "This has to stop," he had told her. Saffron's eyes had flashed with a mixture of hurt and anger. "You can't end this, I won't let you. If you try to leave me, I'll tell everyone what we've done." The threat hung in the air between them, and Everett felt the last vestiges of control slipping away from him. He was trapped, caught between three women, each holding a piece of his destruction in their hands. The night that would change everything started like any other. The Callahan family had just finished dinner, with Constance and the children settling in for a movie night. Everett begged off, claiming he had work to finish in his study. Saffron too excused herself, saying she had plans with friends. But Saffron had no intention of going out that night. Instead, she waited until she was sure the rest of the family was engrossed in their movie before slipping into Everett's study. She found him at his desk, his head in his hands. "We need to talk," Saffron said, closing the door behind her. Saffron moved closer, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and determination. "You need to choose her or me. I won't be your little secret anymore." In that moment, looking at Saffron's face twisted with jealousy and desperation, Everett saw his entire life crumbling before his eyes. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was about to be torn apart by this girl's misguided obsession. Something inside Everett broke. With a roar of frustration and fear, he lunged at Saffron, his hands closing around her throat. He wanted to stop her, to silence the threats that were destroying his world. But once he started, he couldn't stop. Saffron's eyes widened in shock and fear as she clawed at his hands, trying to break free. But Everett was stronger, his grip fueled by panic and adrenaline. It was over in minutes. Saffron's struggles weakened, then ceased altogether. When Everett finally came to his senses and released his grip, she crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The discovery of Saffron's body sent shockwaves through the Callahan household and the wider community. It was Constance who found her, alerted by the unusual silence from Everett's study. Her scream of horror brought the children running, and within minutes the house was swarming with police and paramedics. Everett, in a state of shock, had been found sitting in his chair staring blankly at Saffron's body. He offered no resistance as the police led him away, his silence interpreted as stunned grief by the officers on the scene. Detective Lena Kirka, a veteran of the police department's homicide division, was assigned to lead the investigation. From the moment she stepped into the Callahan home, she sensed that this case was far more complex than a simple home invasion gone wrong, which was the initial theory. As she interviewed the family members, inconsistencies began to emerge. Constance, while devastated, seemed to be harboring suspicions about her husband. The children, Rowan and Ivy, spoke of increasing tension in the house over the past few months, particularly between Everett and Saffron. But it was Everett's behavior that raised the most red flags for Detective Kirk. His affect was flat, his responses to questions vague and evasive. He claimed to have been working in his study all evening, not hearing anything until Constance's scream. Yet, the detective noted there were signs of a struggle in the room, and Everett's clothing was disheveled. As the investigation progressed, more questions arose. Why had Saffron lied about going out with friends? What was she doing in Everett's study so late at night? And most intriguingly, who was the mysterious V that appeared frequently in Saffron's text messages and emails? The autopsy report brought another twist to the case. The cause of death was strangulation, but the medical examiner also found evidence of sexual activity shortly before Saffron's death. This revelation cast the case in a new, disturbing light. As Detective Kirk dug deeper, she began to uncover a web of secrets and lies that ran through the heart of the Callahan family. The picture-perfect facade was crumbling, revealing dark truths that would shock the community to its core. As the investigation into Saffron's murder intensified, Detective Kirk and her team began to piece together the complex puzzle of relationships and secrets within the Callahan family. Each new revelation brought them closer to the shocking truth. A breakthrough came when forensics recovered deleted text messages from Saffron's phone. The messages revealed a passionate, illicit relationship with an older man, referred to only as E. The content of the messages left little doubt that E was Everett Callahan. Armed with this information, Detective Kirk brought Everett in for another round of questioning. Faced with the evidence, Everett's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. He admitted to the affair with Saffron, but vehemently denied killing her, claiming that their relationship had been consensual and that he loved his niece. However, Everett's story was further complicated when Veronica Ashworth came forward. Initially reluctant to involve herself in the investigation, Veronica finally revealed her long-standing affair with Everett after being confronted with evidence linking her to him. Her testimony painted a picture of a man torn between multiple relationships, struggling to keep his various secrets from colliding. Meanwhile, a more thorough search of the Callahan home uncovered a journal hidden in Saffron's room. The entries detailed her growing obsession with her uncle, her discovery of his affair with Veronica, and her plan to confront him on the night of her death. The final entry, dated the day she died, contained a chilling line. "Tonight everything changes. He'll have to choose, her or me." This evidence, combined with the forensic analysis of the crime scene, began to paint a clear picture of what had transpired on that fatal night. DNA evidence found under Saffron's fingernails matched Everett's, indicating a struggle. Fibers from Everett's clothing were found on Saffron's body, contradicting his initial statement that he hadn't been in close contact with her that evening. As the case against Everett built, other witnesses came forward. A neighbor reported hearing raised voices coming from the Callahan house on the night of the murder. A colleague of Everett's mentioned his increasingly erratic behavior at work in the weeks leading up to Saffron's death. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Constance. After days of questioning and faced with the mounting evidence of her husband's infidelity, she finally broke down. She revealed that she had suspected something was going on between Everett and Saffron for weeks. On the night of the murder, she had overheard part of their argument, but had been too afraid to intervene. As Detective Kirk compiled all the evidence, a timeline of events emerged. Saffron had confronted Everett about his affair with Veronica, threatening to expose both relationships if he didn't choose her. In a moment of panic and rage, Everett had strangled Saffron, then attempted to cover up his crime. The case, which had once seemed like a tragic home invasion, had unraveled into a sordid tale of forbidden desire, jealousy, and ultimately, murder. The respected Callahan family, once the picture of suburban success, now stood exposed as a web of lies and betrayal. The courtroom was packed each day as the prosecution laid out its case, painting a picture of a man whose web of lies and illicit relationships had finally caught up with him. Prosecutor presented a compelling narrative, weaving together the physical evidence, witness testimonies, and the damning contents of Saffron's journal. She portrayed Everett as a manipulative predator who had taken advantage of his young, vulnerable niece, then killed her in a fit of rage when she threatened to expose him. Everett's defense team attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial and that Saffron's journal entries were the fantasies of a troubled young woman. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Everett himself took the stand. Under intense cross-examination, He finally admitted to his affair with Saffron, but continued to deny killing her. His emotional breakdown on the stand, as he begged for forgiveness from his family, left many in the courtroom stunned. As the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. In a moment of high drama, the foreman stood and declared Everett Callahan guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Everett to 25 years to life in prison, bringing a close to a case that had shocked and captivated the nation. The Callahan tragedy left an indelible mark on the community. The family's once pristine reputation was in tatters, their name forever associated with scandal and murder. In the quiet suburb of Millbrook, nestled just outside the bustling city of Hartford, Connecticut, a heinous crime shattered the illusion of peaceful suburban life. On a crisp autumn morning in September 2018, the body of 17-year-old Sarah Thompson was discovered in the woods behind her family's home. The gruesome scene sent shockwaves through the community, leaving residents locked behind their doors and whispering about the killer who walked among them. Detective Michael Carter, a seasoned investigator with the Hartford Police Department, was called to lead the case. With his sharp intuition and unwavering dedication, Carter delved into the intricate web of lies and deceit surrounding Sarah's murder. Little did he know that this case would challenge his perceptions and force him to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion initially fell on Sarah's stepmother, Amanda Wilson. The troubled relationship between the two had been no secret to their neighbors, and Amanda's apparent jealousy of her stepdaughter seemed to provide a motive. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a twisted tale of betrayal, secrets, and fatal consequences. At the center of this tragedy stood Robert Wilson, Sarah's stepfather. A respected businessman and pillar of the community, Robert appeared to be the grieving father figure, supporting his wife through their shared loss. But as Detective Carter would soon discover, Robert's carefully constructed facade concealed a web of lies that would ultimately lead to his downfall. This is the story of a murder that tore apart a family, challenged a detective's instincts, and revealed the devastating consequences of unchecked desire and betrayal. It serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy in our very own neighborhoods. Sarah Thompson was a vibrant and promising young woman whose life was cut tragically short just weeks before her 18th birthday. Born to single mother Amanda Thompson in 2001, Sarah grew up as a bright and curious child, always eager to learn and explore the world around her. From an early age, Sarah showed a passion for art and literature. Her teachers often praised her creativity and insightful essays, marking her as a student with great potential. Sarah's artwork adorned the walls of her high school, and she had recently begun to explore photography, capturing the beauty of nature in the woods behind her home, the same woods that would ultimately become the site of her untimely death. Despite her academic and artistic achievements, Sarah's home life was far from perfect. When she was 12, her mother married Robert Wilson, a successful local businessman. While Sarah initially welcomed the stability Robert brought to their lives, the relationship between stepdaughter and stepfather grew increasingly strained as Sarah entered her teenage years. Friends and classmates described Sarah as kind-hearted, but fiercely independent. She had a small, tight-knit group of friends and was known for standing up against bullying in school. Her best friend, Emily Chen, recalled Sarah's dream of studying journalism at NYU, aspiring to become an investigative reporter and uncover truths hidden beneath the surface. Sarah's relationship with her mother, Amanda, had always been complex. As an only child, Sarah had been the center of Amanda's world for years. However, the arrival of Robert in their lives created a shift in dynamics. Sarah often felt that her mother prioritized her new marriage over their mother-daughter bond, leading to frequent arguments and emotional distance. In the months leading up to her death, those close to Sarah noticed a change in her demeanor. She became more withdrawn, spending increased time alone in her room or wandering in the woods with her camera. Her art took on darker themes, and her usually meticulous schoolwork began to slip. Emily remembered Sarah seeming distracted and worried, but when pressed, Sarah would brush off concerns with a forced smile and a change of subject. What no one knew at the time was that Sarah had stumbled upon a secret that would prove fatal. In her quest for truth and her natural curiosity, she had uncovered something that someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. Sarah Thompson's young life, full of promise and potential, was snuffed out just as she stood on the threshold of adulthood, leaving behind a community in mourning and a mystery that would shake Millbrook to its core. Robert Wilson, age 45 at the time of Sarah's murder, presented himself as the epitome of suburban success. A charismatic and well-respected financial advisor, Robert had built a thriving practice in Hartford, managing the wealth of some of the city's most affluent residents. His polished appearance and confident demeanor made him a natural leader in the community, serving on the local Chamber of Commerce and coaching youth soccer. Born and raised in a working-class family in Boston, Robert had clawed his way up the social ladder through a combination of charm, intelligence, and ruthless ambition. He met Amanda Thompson at a charity gala in 2012, and their whirlwind romance culminated in marriage just 8 months later. To the outside world, Robert appeared to be the perfect husband and stepfather, providing stability and financial security to Amanda and Sarah. However, beneath the veneer of success and respectability, Robert harbored dark secrets and unfulfilled desires. His marriage to Amanda had quickly lost its luster, and he found himself drawn to the excitement of an illicit affair. For the past year, Robert had been involved in a passionate relationship with Elena Gonzalez, the wife of his next-door neighbor and close friend David. Robert's affair with Elena was more than just a physical attraction. He felt truly alive in her presence, experiencing a connection he believed he had never shared with Amanda. The two lovers would meet in secret, stealing moments of passion while their spouses were at work or running errands. Robert became expert at lying and manipulating those around him to maintain his double life. As Sarah entered her late teens, Robert found himself increasingly uncomfortable in her presence. Her perceptive nature and keen eye for detail made him paranoid that she might uncover his infidelity. He began to avoid spending time alone with his stepdaughter, making excuses to miss family dinners and events. Friends and colleagues described Robert as charming and generous, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. David Gonzalez, unaware of Robert's betrayal, often praised him as the best neighbor and friend a man could ask for. Robert's clients trusted him implicitly, drawn in by his confident assurances and impressive track record. Yet those who knew Robert best sensed an underlying current of discontent. His assistant at the financial firm noted his increased irritability and distraction in the months leading up to Sarah's death. Robert's longtime friend from college, Mark Stevens, observed that Robert seemed to be living on edge, as if constantly looking over his shoulder. Little did anyone suspect that behind Robert Wilson's carefully crafted image lay a man capable of unspeakable acts, driven by desperation to protect his secrets and preserve his way of life at any cost. The grisly discovery was made on the morning of September 15, 2018, by a jogger on his usual trail through the woods behind the Wilson residence. The body of Sarah Thompson lay partially concealed beneath a pile of leaves and branches, a crude attempt at concealment that did little to hide the horrific nature of the crime. Detective Michael Carter arrived on the scene within the hour, his experienced eye taking in every detail. Sarah's body showed signs of a violent struggle. Bruises marred her arms and face, and defensive wounds on her hands indicated she had fought desperately for her life. The cause of death was immediately apparent: a jagged wound across her throat, likely inflicted with a serrated blade. As the forensics team combed the area for evidence, Carter noted several key details. Sarah's camera, which friends claimed she always carried on her woodland excursions, was missing. Drag marks and disturbed vegetation suggested the body had been moved from the initial site of the attack, possibly in an attempt to hide it from immediate discovery. Perhaps most tellingly, there were no signs of sexual assault, leading Carter to suspect that the motive for the murder was personal rather than opportunistic. The brutality of the attack pointed to a crime of passion. Someone who knew Sarah and had been driven to a moment of uncontrollable rage. As news of the murder spread, the once peaceful community of Millbrook descended into a state of fear and suspicion. Neighbors who had previously left their doors unlocked now double-checked their security systems. Parents kept their children indoors, and the woods that had once been a place of recreation became a no-go zone, cordoned off with yellow police tape. Detective Michael Carter, a 20-year veteran of the Hartford Police Department, took charge of the investigation with a grim determination. Known for his meticulous approach and uncanny ability to see connections others missed, Carter had solved some of the department's most challenging cases. As he stood in the Wilsons' living room, surveying the family photos on the mantel, he knew this case would test him like never before. The first 48 hours of the investigation were a whirlwind of activity. Carter and his team conducted initial interviews with family members, friends, and neighbors. Sarah's school records were examined, her social media account scrutinized, and her movements in the days leading up to her death were painstakingly reconstructed. Robert Wilson, appearing shell-shocked, provided a detailed account of his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He claimed to have been working late at his office, a fact corroborated by security footage and his assistant's testimony. Amanda Wilson, still visibly distraught, struggled to maintain composure during her interview. She admitted to having argued with Sarah the afternoon before her disappearance, but insisted it was just typical mother-daughter friction. As Carter delved deeper, a picture began to emerge of a household fraught with tension. Neighbors spoke of frequent arguments between Sarah and her mother, their raised voices often carrying across manicured lawns. Sarah's best friend, Emily Chen, revealed that Sarah had been increasingly unhappy at home, feeling trapped and misunderstood. The forensics team's initial findings provided more questions than answers. Trace evidence found on Sarah's clothing didn't match samples taken from Robert or Amanda. The murder weapon, likely a hunting knife or similar serrated blade, was nowhere to be found despite an extensive search of the Wilson property and surrounding areas. A breakthrough came when Carter interviewed Elena Gonzalez, the Wilsons' next-door neighbor. Elena, visibly nervous during the interview, mentioned that she had seen Sarah arguing with Amanda in the driveway the day before her disappearance. More intriguingly, Elena let slip that Amanda had always seemed jealous of her daughter's youth and beauty. This information, combined with the tumultuous home environment and Amanda's shaky alibi for the night of the murder, led Carter to focus his attention on Sarah's mother. He theorized that years of resentment had finally boiled over, resulting in a confrontation that turned deadly. As the investigation entered its second week, Carter felt confident they were on the right track. He obtained a warrant to search Amanda's personal belongings and communications, hoping to find the crucial piece of evidence that would break the case wide open. However, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of Carter's mind. Something about Robert Wilson's calm demeanor and perfect alibi struck him as too neat, too convenient. Little did Carter know that his instincts were leading him toward a truth far more sinister than he could have imagined. As the investigation progressed, all signs seemed to point toward Amanda Wilson as the prime suspect of her daughter's murder. Detective Carter, driven by the evidence at hand, began to build a case against the 42-year-old homemaker with a troubled past. Carter's team uncovered a series of heated text exchanges between Amanda and Sarah in the weeks leading up to the murder. In one particularly vicious argument, Amanda accused Sarah of trying to sabotage her marriage, while Sarah fired back, calling her mother a pathetic, jealous old woman. These digital breadcrumbs seemed to support the theory of a family dynamic that had reached a breaking point. Further fueling suspicion was Amanda's behavior in the aftermath of Sarah's death. While initially distraught, she quickly became defensive and evasive during questioning. Her alibi for the night of the murder was weak. She claimed to have been home alone, watching television with no one to corroborate her story. A search of the Wilson home uncovered a journal hidden in Amanda's bedside table. Entries detailed her growing resentment toward Sarah, lamenting the girl's beauty and the attention she received from Robert. One disturbing passage read, "Sometimes I wish she would just disappear. Our lives would be so much better without her constant presence, her judging eyes." The case against Amanda seemed to strengthen when a neighbor reported seeing her return home in the early hours of the morning on the day Sarah's body was discovered. Amanda had no explanation for this late-night excursion, claiming she must have been sleepwalking, a condition she had never mentioned before. As circumstantial evidence mounted, Carter felt increasing pressure from his superiors in the media to make an arrest. The community, gripped by fear, demanded justice for Sarah. Amanda Wilson, once a sympathetic figure, became the target of public hatred and suspicion. Carter, despite his growing certainty of Amanda's guilt, couldn't shake a lingering doubt. Something about her desperation and fear during interrogations didn't align with the calculated killer he believed had committed this crime. Nevertheless, with the evidence at hand, he prepared to make an arrest. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Sarah's body was found, Amanda Wilson was taken into custody. As she was led from her home in handcuffs, she protested her innocence, her cries echoing through the stunned neighborhood. Robert Wilson watched from the doorway, his face an unreadable mask as his wife was placed in the back of a police cruiser. Little did Carter know that in his pursuit of justice, he had fallen for a brilliantly orchestrated misdirection, leaving the true killer free to cover his tracks. The case against Amanda Wilson seemed airtight, but Detective Michael Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, that finally set him on the path to the truth. While reviewing security footage from businesses near the Wilson home, Carter noticed Robert's car leaving his office parking lot much earlier than he had claimed on the night of the murder. Intrigued by this discrepancy, Carter decided to dig deeper into Robert Wilson's life. He re-interviewed Robert's colleagues and clients, paying closer attention to the man's movements and relationships. It was during a conversation with Robert's assistant that Carter stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. Robert had been making frequent, unexplained trips to a coffee shop across town, always during his lunch break. Surveillance of the coffee shop revealed a startling discovery. Robert was meeting regularly with Elena Gonzalez, his neighbor's wife. The two displayed an intimacy that went far beyond friendly neighborly interactions. Carter had uncovered Robert's secret affair. With this new information, Carter approached Elena for another interview. Confronted with evidence of the affair, Elena broke down, revealing the extent of her relationship with Robert. They had been involved for over a year, stealing moments together whenever they could. Elena, racked with guilt, admitted that she had lied in her previous statement to protect Robert. The affair cast Robert's alibi for the night of the murder in a new light. Elena confirmed that they had indeed met that evening, contradicting Robert's claim of working late. This revelation shattered the carefully constructed timeline Robert had provided. As Carter delved further into the relationship between Robert and Elena, he uncovered a web of lies and secret rendezvous. Bank records showed Robert had recently inquired about transferring large sums of money offshore. Email exchanges hinted at plans for a new life together, away from their spouses and responsibilities. The detective now faced a troubling question. Could Robert Wilson, the grieving stepfather, actually be Sarah's killer? The motive was unclear, but the cracks in Robert's perfect facade were beginning to show. Carter realized he had been so focused on Amanda that he had nearly missed the real story unfolding right before his eyes. The pivotal moment in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Sarah's best friend, Emily Chen, approached Detective Carter with a small leather-bound book, Sarah's personal diary. Emily, racked with guilt, admitted she had initially withheld the diary, fearing it might tarnish Sarah's memory. But as suspicion fell on Amanda, Emily realized the truth was more important than protecting her friend's secrets. Carter spent a sleepless night poring over Sarah's private thoughts. The diary painted a vivid picture of a young woman grappling with a terrible discovery. In entries dating back several months, Sarah wrote of her growing suspicion that her stepfather was having an affair. She described catching glimpses of furtive text messages, overhearing hushed phone calls, and noticing Robert's increasingly erratic behavior. The most damning entry came just 3 days before Sarah's murder. In shaky handwriting, she recounted following Robert one evening and witnessing him in an intimate embrace with Elena Gonzalez. Sarah wrote of her disgust and betrayal, expressing uncertainty about whether to confront Robert or tell her mother. This revelation provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Sarah had discovered Robert's affair, presenting a clear motive for murder. Robert, a man who had built his life on carefully maintaining appearances, faced the threat of losing everything: his marriage, his reputation, and his financial stability. Armed with this new information, Carter revisited the forensic evidence. He ordered a more thorough examination of Sarah's clothing, specifically searching for trace evidence that might have been overlooked. The results were telling. Fibers found on Sarah's jacket matched those from a rare wool blend used in Robert's expensive suits. Furthermore, a re-examination of Sarah's phone records showed a series of calls to Robert's office number on the day of her disappearance. The calls had been brief, suggesting Sarah might have been trying to confront her stepfather or arrange a meeting. Carter also discovered that Robert had purchased a hunting knife from a local sporting goods store just a week before the murder. The knife, conspicuously missing from the Wilson home, matched the type of weapon believed to have been used in the crime. As the pieces fell into place, Carter realized the extent of Robert's deception. He had not only manipulated his family and community, but had also skillfully misdirected the entire investigation towards Amanda. The detective felt a mix of admiration for Robert's cunning and disgust at his cold-blooded actions. With mounting evidence pointing to Robert Wilson as the killer, Carter knew he needed to move quickly. The man who had once been viewed as a pillar of the community was now revealed to be a calculating murderer, willing to sacrifice his stepdaughter to protect his secrets. Detective Carter decided to confront Robert Wilson at his office, away from the prying eyes of neighbors and the media that had been camped outside the Wilson home. As Carter and his partner entered the plush confines of Robert's financial advisory firm, they found him in the middle of a client meeting, the picture of professional composure. In a voice barely above a whisper, Robert began to talk. He spoke of Sarah confronting him in the woods, threatening to expose his affair to Amanda and Elena's husband. He described the panic that overtook him, the fear of losing everything he had worked for. With tears streaming down his face, Robert recounted how he had lashed out in desperation, silencing Sarah permanently. The confession poured out of him, a torrent of guilt and self-loathing. Robert described how he had meticulously planned to frame Amanda, playing on the known tensions between stepmother and stepdaughter. As Carter placed him under arrest, Robert's only words were a broken plea. "Don't tell Elena. Please don't let her know what I've done." The once proud man was led out of his office in handcuffs, his world collapsing around him as the truth of his actions finally came to light. After a 2-week trial and mere hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, including first-degree murder. The judge, citing the brutal nature of the crime and Robert's calculated attempts to deceive investigators, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had been served. But for those whose lives had been shattered by Robert's actions, the wounds would take far longer to heal. In the end, the case of Robert Wilson stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable loss, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the enduring power of a young woman's voice, even when silenced, to ultimately reveal the truth. Sebastian Thompson, a successful businessman, and Hazel, his homemaker wife, had been married for 15 years. Their marriage, once vibrant, had been faltering, prompting them to seek professional help. They enrolled in a retreat led by the renowned Dr. David Green, a charismatic therapist with a reputation for mending fractured relationships. On the 4th night of the retreat, Sebastian was found dead in their cabin. His death, initially appearing as a tragic accident, soon revealed darker undertones. The investigation uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and manipulation. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green, hidden from everyone but the two, was a catalyst for the events that unfolded. Dr. Green, once a beacon of hope for struggling couples, was now at the center of a murder investigation. His charming exterior masked a manipulative mind with financial motives. As the truth unraveled, it became clear that Sebastian's death was no accident, but a coldly orchestrated murder. This true crime story delves into the complex relationships, personal histories, and the sinister plot that led to Sebastian Thompson's untimely death. It examines the psychological manipulation employed by Dr. Green, the emotional turmoil of Hazel, and the meticulous investigation that brought the truth to light. This is the chilling account of a couple's therapy retreat that turned deadly, revealing the dark side of love and trust. The couple's therapy retreat was situated in a secluded, luxurious cabin in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests and picturesque views. The location was chosen to provide an escape from the daily stresses of life, offering a peaceful environment conducive to healing and introspection. As Sebastian and Hazel Thompson arrived at the retreat, they were greeted by Dr. David Green. With his warm smile and reassuring presence, he exuded confidence and empathy, instantly putting the participants at ease. Alongside Sebastian and Hazel, there were 3 other couples, each grappling with their own issues. The retreat kicked off with a group session, where each couple introduced themselves and shared their reasons for attending. Sebastian, tall and well-built, spoke with a hint of frustration in his voice. He expressed his desire to rekindle the love and trust that had diminished over the years. Hazel, petite and attractive, echoed his sentiments, though her eyes betrayed a deeper, unspoken sadness. Dr. Green facilitated the sessions with skill and sensitivity, creating an atmosphere of openness and vulnerability. He emphasized the importance of honest communication and trust, urging couples to confront their issues head-on. The initial sessions were intense, with emotions running high as old wounds were reopened. Sebastian and Hazel's interactions were Sebastianed by underlying tension. Sebastian's controlling nature clashed with Hazel's growing sense of independence. Their exchanges were fraught with resentment and unspoken accusations. Dr. Green seemed particularly attentive to their case, often singling them out for deeper analysis. In private sessions, the dynamics were different. Dr. Green focused on building rapport, carefully listening to their individual grievances. He offered Hazel a sympathetic ear, understanding her feelings of entrapment and frustration. For Sebastian, he played the role of a stern yet caring advisor, urging him to let go of his controlling tendencies. The other couples at the retreat observed the palpable tension between Sebastian and Hazel. They noticed how Dr. Green seemed to give Hazel more attention, often engaging her in deeper conversations. This did not go unnoticed by Sebastian, who began to feel a growing sense of unease. The retreat's idyllic setting provided a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The towering pines and serene lake seemed to mock the chaos within the hearts of the participants. As the days progressed, the initial hope for reconciliation gave way to a sense of impending doom. Sebastian and Hazel's relationship, instead of healing, seemed to be unraveling further. Dr. Green's presence, once a source of comfort, became a point of contention. The other couples, too, began to sense that something was amiss, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. As the retreat moved into its third day, the tension reached a boiling point. The stage was set for a tragic turn of events that would shatter the tranquil facade of the retreat and expose the dark secrets lurking beneath. Sebastian Thompson's life was a testament to hard work and ambition. Born into a middle-class family, he had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and relentless effort. By the age of 45, he had secured a high-ranking position at a prestigious firm, earning a handsome salary and enjoying the perks of success. However, his professional achievements came at a cost. The long hours and constant pressure strained his personal life, creating a rift between him and Hazel. Sebastian's control issues stemmed from his desire for perfection. He demanded the best from himself and those around him, often leading to conflicts at home. His need to control every aspect of his life extended to his marriage, where he expected Hazel to conform to his ideals. This created a suffocating environment for Hazel, who felt increasingly trapped in a role she hadn't chosen. Hazel Thompson, in contrast, had led a more sheltered life. Growing up in a small town, she had married Sebastian young and dedicated herself to being a supportive wife and homemaker. Initially, she found fulfillment in this role, but as the years passed, she began to feel a deep sense of dissatisfaction. The love and attention she once received from Sebastian had dwindled, replaced by criticism and control. Hazel's discontent grew as she watched her husband thrive in his career, while her own aspirations were stifled. She longed for freedom, for a chance to explore her own identity outside the confines of her marriage. It was during this time of vulnerability that she met Dr. David Green. Dr. Green's background was shrouded in mystery. He was a charismatic figure, known for his ability to connect with people on a deep emotional level. His reputation as a skilled therapist had earned him a loyal following, and his retreats were highly sought after. However, beneath his polished exterior lay a manipulative mind. Dr. Green had a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals for personal gain. His charm and intelligence masked a dark side that few were aware of. He had a knack for identifying those who were emotionally fragile and used their insecurities to his advantage. Financial gain was a significant motivator for him, but so was the thrill of control. Hazel's vulnerability and dissatisfaction made her an easy target for Dr. Green. He began their affair with calculated precision, offering her the attention and validation she craved. Their interactions started innocently enough, with late-night conversations and sympathetic listening. Gradually, he intensified his influence, making Hazel dependent on his approval and guidance. Dr. Green's manipulation extended beyond the affair. He subtly planted seeds of doubt and resentment in Hazel's mind, exacerbating the existing tension in her marriage. He portrayed himself as the only one who truly understood her, driving a wedge between her and Sebastian. His ultimate goal was to remove Sebastian from the equation, both to deepen his control over Hazel and to gain financially. Sebastian, unaware of the affair, sensed a shift in Hazel's behavior. She became more distant and withdrawn, often disappearing for hours without explanation. His attempts to confront her were met with defensiveness and anger, further straining their relationship. He turned to Dr. Green for guidance, unaware that the man he trusted was orchestrating his downfall. Dr. Green's plan was meticulous. He exploited the trust placed in him by both Sebastian and Hazel, using their therapy sessions to manipulate their emotions. He created scenarios that heightened the conflict between them, pushing them to the brink. His aim was to drive Sebastian to a point of desperation where he could be easily eliminated. As the retreat progressed, Dr. Green's influence over Hazel grew stronger. She became increasingly reliant on him, viewing him as her savior from a life of misery. Her perception of Sebastian shifted from a loving husband to an oppressive figure, a change fueled by Dr. Green's constant manipulation. The stage was set for a tragic culmination. Sebastian's frustration and Hazel's growing dependence on Dr. Green created a volatile mix, primed for a deadly outcome. Dr. Green, ever the puppet master, watched as his plan unfolded, confident in his ability to control the narrative. The affair between Hazel and Dr. Green began subtly, almost innocently. During the early sessions, Dr. Green took a special interest in Hazel, recognizing her vulnerability. He offered her a sympathetic ear and gentle words of encouragement, which she desperately needed. Their relationship escalated during private therapy sessions. Dr. Green's office, a cozy room with soft lighting and plush furniture, became a sanctuary for Hazel. She poured out her heart, sharing her frustrations and dreams. Dr. Green listened attentively, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers, making her feel seen and understood. Late-night conversations turned into secret rendezvous. They would meet in secluded spots around the retreat, hidden from the prying eyes of other participants. Their meetings were filled with whispered confessions and stolen kisses, each encounter deepening their bond. Hazel's internal conflict was intense. She felt a growing attachment to Dr. Green, yet guilt gnawed at her conscience. She loved Sebastian, or at least she thought she did. But the connection she felt with Dr. Green was unlike anything she had experienced. He made her feel alive, appreciated, and desired. Dr. Green, on the other hand, was playing a calculated game. He knew how to manipulate Hazel's emotions, feeding her insecurities and deepening her dependence on him. His motives were far from pure. Financial gain and control drove his actions. He saw Hazel not just as a lover, but as a pawn in his grander scheme. Their affair was a dangerous dance fraught with risk. Hazel's behavior became increasingly erratic, her guilt manifesting as anxiety and paranoia. She feared discovery, not just for the affair but for the growing realization that Dr. Green had a hold over her that she couldn't break. One evening, as they met in a secluded part of the retreat, Dr. Green's true nature began to surface. He spoke of their future together, painting a picture of a life free from Sebastian's control. Hazel, caught in his web, began to believe in the possibility of a new life. However, the cost of this new life was steep, and the shadows of doubt began to creep into her mind. Dr. Green's manipulation extended to Sebastian as well. He planted seeds of suspicion, subtly suggesting that Hazel's behavior was a reaction to Sebastian's controlling nature. He urged Sebastian to be more understanding and patient, all the while knowing that his advice would only exacerbate the tension. As the retreat progressed, the affair became more intense, the secrecy heightening the thrill and the danger. One evening, during a particularly heated session, the tension boiled over. Sebastian, feeling cornered and misunderstood, lashed out verbally. He accused Hazel of not trying, of already giving up on their marriage. Hazel, instead of responding, looked to Dr. Green for support. This small gesture was the breaking point for Sebastian. His face contorted with a mixture of hurt and rage, and he stormed out of the session. Dr. Green seized the opportunity to further manipulate Hazel. He comforted her, emphasizing how Sebastian's behavior was proof of his controlling nature. Hazel, emotionally fragile and desperate for validation, absorbed Dr. Green's words, her trust in him growing stronger. The other couples were taken aback by Sebastian's outburst. They had their own issues, but none had witnessed such a dramatic confrontation. Dr. Green addressed the group, explaining that sometimes conflicts needed to be brought to the surface to be resolved. His explanation was met with nods of understanding, though doubts lingered. Sebastian, alone and seething, wandered the retreat grounds. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Hazel, not just to the problems in their marriage, but to Dr. Green himself. His mind raced with suspicions and fears, each thought more troubling than the last. He needed to find a way to reach Hazel, to break through the barriers that seemed to be growing between them. That night in their cabin, the atmosphere was tense and heavy with unspoken words. Sebastian tried to reach out to Hazel, to apologize and explain, but she was distant, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. The silence between them was deafening, a stark contrast to the arguments that had filled the past days. Dr. Green, watching from the shadows, felt a sense of triumph. His plan was unfolding perfectly. The tension between Sebastian and Hazel was at its peak, and the stage was set for the next phase of his scheme. He knew that Sebastian was close to breaking, and all he needed was one final push. As the retreat moved into its fourth day, the sense of impending doom grew stronger. The other couples, though unaware of the full extent of the turmoil, sensed that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Green maintained his facade of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed a glint of anticipation. The stage was set for a tragic climax, one that would shatter the lives of those involved and expose the dark undercurrents that had been simmering beneath the surface. The tension, carefully cultivated by Dr. Green, was about to reach a deadly crescendo. The fourth night of the retreat was shrouded in an eerie stillness. The usual sounds of the forest seemed muted, and a heavy fog rolled in, enveloping the cabin in a ghostly embrace. Sebastian and Hazel had retired to their room after another tense day, the silence between them more oppressive than ever. Around midnight, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The other couples, jolted from their sleep, rushed out of their rooms, confusion and fear etched on their faces. The source of the scream was unmistakable. It came from Sebastian and Hazel's cabin. Dr. Green, appearing composed yet concerned, quickly took charge. He directed the others to stay back while he entered the cabin. Inside, he found Hazel, pale and trembling, standing over Sebastian's lifeless body. The room was in disarray, signs of a struggle evident. Sebastian lay on the floor, his eyes wide open in a final expression of shock and pain. There were visible bruises on his neck, and a broken lamp lay nearby, its jagged edges stained with blood. Hazel, in a state of shock, kept muttering that she didn't know what happened, that she had woken up to find him like this. Dr. Green, masking his satisfaction, wrapped his arm around Hazel, guiding her away from the scene. He assured the other participants that he would handle the situation and contacted the local authorities. Within minutes, the tranquility of the retreat was shattered by the arrival of police and paramedics. The initial investigation pointed to foul play. The signs of struggle and the nature of Sebastian's injuries indicated a violent confrontation. Hazel, as the only other person in the room, became the prime suspect. She was taken into custody for questioning, her dazed state complicating the initial interrogation. Dr. Green, playing the role of the concerned therapist, vouched for Hazel. He explained to the police that she had been under immense stress and that Sebastian had been aggressive. He painted a picture of a woman pushed to her limits, subtly suggesting that she might have acted in self-defense. The police, while not entirely convinced, took Dr. Green's statements into account. They began piecing together the events leading up to the murder. Other participants were interviewed, and it became clear that the Thompsons' relationship had been in turmoil. The tension between them, coupled with Sebastian's controlling nature, provided a potential motive. However, as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in Hazel's account began to emerge. She couldn't clearly remember the events of the night, her memories a foggy jumble of fear and confusion. Her emotional state was fragile, and she seemed genuinely distraught over Sebastian's death. Dr. Green continued to support Hazel, maintaining his role as her confidant and protector. He provided the police with additional details, carefully crafting a narrative that supported his version of events. He portrayed Sebastian as a domineering husband, and Hazel as a victim driven to desperation. As the police delved deeper, they uncovered the affair between Hazel and Dr. Green. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. The affair provided a potential motive for Hazel, but it also raised questions about Dr. Green's involvement. His influence over Hazel was evident, and some investigators began to suspect that he might have had a hand in the events. Dr. Green, sensing the growing suspicion, remained calm and cooperative. He deflected attention from himself, emphasizing his role as a therapist trying to help a troubled couple. His charm and professionalism worked in his favor, but the police weren't entirely convinced. The discovery of the affair shifted the focus of the investigation. Hazel, now seen as both a suspect and a victim, faced intense scrutiny. Dr. Green, while not officially a suspect, was under the radar. The stage was set for a complex and convoluted investigation, with multiple layers of deception and manipulation to unravel. As the night wore on, the sense of tragedy and confusion deepened. Sebastian's death, initially seen as a tragic accident, now appeared to be a murder driven by hidden motives and dark secrets. The serene retreat had become the scene of a chilling crime, and the truth was far from clear. The police investigation into Sebastian Thompson's death quickly intensified. Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the retreat the morning after the murder, determined to uncover the truth behind the tragic event. Detective Collins began by interviewing the other participants. Their accounts painted a picture of escalating tension between Sebastian and Hazel. Most of them mentioned Dr. Green's unusual interest in Hazel and his seemingly antagonistic stance towards Sebastian. The affair, already known to the police, became a focal point in her inquiry. In her interview with Hazel, Detective Collins noticed the woman's fragility and confusion. Hazel's account of the night was fragmented and inconsistent. She repeatedly claimed she couldn't remember what had happened, that she had woken up to find Sebastian dead. Her emotional distress seemed genuine, yet Collins couldn't ignore the possibility that Hazel was involved. Dr. Green was interviewed next. He maintained his composed demeanor, offering a polished account of his interactions with Sebastian and Hazel. He admitted to the affair, describing it as a regrettable but understandable consequence of Hazel's unhappy marriage. He framed himself as a supportive figure, trying to help Hazel through her emotional turmoil. Despite his cooperative attitude, Detective Collins couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Green was hiding something. His responses were too calculated, too perfect. She decided to delve deeper into his background, looking for any signs of past misconduct. The retreat's other participants provided further insights. Several of them mentioned the escalating arguments between Sebastian and Hazel, and a few noted that Dr. Green seemed to exacerbate these conflicts rather than resolve them. One participant, a woman named Rachel, mentioned overhearing a particularly heated argument between Sebastian and Hazel the night before the murder. Detective Collins followed up on Rachel's lead, examining the retreat's layout and the possibility of others hearing the argument. The cabin's isolated location made it unlikely that anyone outside could have heard, suggesting that Rachel might have been closer than she admitted. Collins began to consider the possibility of other witnesses or accomplices. The forensic team provided crucial evidence. The bruises on Sebastian's neck indicated strangulation, and the broken lamp suggested a violent struggle. However, there were no defensive wounds on Hazel, raising questions about her involvement in the physical altercation. The presence of an unidentified fingerprint on the lamp added another layer of mystery. As the investigation progressed, Collins discovered financial irregularities linked to Dr. Green. Large sums of money had been transferred from Hazel's account to an offshore account in Dr. Green's name. This revelation pointed to a clear financial motive, suggesting that Dr. Green had been manipulating Hazel not just emotionally, but financially as well. Armed with Hazel's partial recollection and the financial evidence, Detective Collins confronted Dr. Green. His calm facade cracked as he faced the mounting evidence. The fingerprint on the broken lamp, initially unidentified, was found to belong to Dr. Green. This evidence, combined with Hazel's testimony and the financial trail, solidified the case against him. Dr. Green's manipulative tactics had backfired, leaving a trail of evidence that pointed directly to him. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Foster, meticulously laid out the evidence against Dr. Green. They highlighted his manipulative tactics, the financial exploitation of Hazel, and the clear motive behind Sebastian's murder. Witnesses, including Hazel and other retreat participants, testified about the escalating tension and Dr. Green's undue influence. The jury, after deliberating for several hours, found Dr. Green guilty of first-degree murder and financial exploitation, and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, the truth had been uncovered, and justice had been served. The scars left behind were deep, but they were also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Hazel and the other survivors found a way to move forward, their experiences shaping a future where trust and healing could coexist. In the quiet, picturesque town of Pine Hill, the gruesome murder of Jennifer Johnson sent shockwaves through the community. What appeared to be a peaceful, close-knit suburban enclave was shattered by a crime of passion and betrayal that revealed the dark underbelly of seemingly idyllic lives. The lives of two couples, Daniel and Linda Garner, and Mark and Jennifer Johnson, intertwined in ways that would lead to obsession, deceit, and ultimately, murder. Daniel Garner was a respected architect, known for his charming demeanor and seemingly perfect marriage to Linda, a dedicated school teacher. Mark Johnson, a successful financial advisor, and his wife Jennifer were the Garners' closest friends. The two couples shared more than just neighborhood barbecues and weekend getaways. They also engaged in a consensual wife-swapping arrangement that initially brought excitement and novelty to their lives. However, beneath the surface of this unconventional lifestyle, dangerous emotions were brewing. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer grew into an all-consuming obsession, one that Linda, his wife, was painfully aware of. Jennifer, sensing the intensity of Daniel's feelings, decided to put an end to the arrangement, not realizing the deadly consequences her decision would provoke. Daniel and Linda Garner had been married for 10 years, and from the outside, their marriage appeared to be a model of stability and happiness. Daniel was a successful architect, known for his innovative designs and charismatic personality. Linda, a third-grade teacher, was beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues. They lived in a charming house on Maple Street, surrounded by a well-tended garden that Linda took great pride in. Mark and Jennifer Johnson moved to Pine Hill 5 years ago and quickly became friends with the Garners. Mark, a financial advisor, was outgoing and affable, always the life of the party. Jennifer, with her striking beauty and magnetic personality, was equally popular. The Johnsons' arrival brought a new dynamic to the neighborhood, and their friendship with the Garners blossomed over shared interests and mutual respect. The idea of wife-swapping was first brought up during a dinner party at the Garners' home. Fueled by wine and a sense of adventure, the conversation turned to the topic of open relationships. To everyone's surprise, the concept was met with curiosity rather than shock. Over the next few weeks, the idea was discussed more seriously, with all parties agreeing to boundaries and rules to ensure their primary relationships remained intact. The first encounter was awkward but exciting. Daniel and Jennifer, and Mark and Linda exchanged partners for the night. It was a thrilling yet nerve-wracking experience, but one that left them eager for more. What started as a once-in-a-while experiment soon became a regular part of their lives, adding a spark to both marriages. Initially, the arrangement seemed to work well. Both couples appeared happier and more connected. They maintained their social activities, often hosting joint parties and going on vacations together. Their secret was carefully guarded, discussed only within the confines of their homes or during private gatherings. The novelty of the arrangement brought a sense of exhilaration, and for a while, it seemed like they had found the perfect balance. However, as the months passed, subtle changes began to surface, particularly in Daniel's behavior. He started to show an unusual amount of interest in Jennifer, often finding reasons to spend time alone with her. Linda noticed his increasing preoccupation, but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. Mark, too, seemed oblivious to the growing tension. Unbeknownst to the others, Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was turning into something deeper and more troubling. He found himself thinking about her constantly, replaying their encounters in his mind and craving more time with her. What had started as a harmless adventure was slowly morphing into an obsession that would have devastating consequences for all involved. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was no longer just a thrill. It had evolved into an all-consuming obsession. He thought about her incessantly, his mind wandering to their encounters during work meetings and family dinners. His architectural projects, once his passion, now seemed secondary to his desire for Jennifer. He started to find ways to be near her, volunteering to help with tasks Mark usually handled, or inviting the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda began to notice the change in her husband. At first, she attributed it to the excitement of their new lifestyle, but soon it became clear that Daniel's interest in Jennifer went beyond their agreement. He became irritable and distant when they weren't with the Johnsons, and his conversations often veered towards Jennifer's likes and dislikes, her quirks and habits. One evening, while cleaning up after a dinner party, Linda confronted Daniel. His reaction was defensive, dismissing her concerns as jealousy. Linda, not wanting to disrupt the delicate balance they had established, let it go but kept a closer eye on him. Her suspicions grew when she found him staring at Jennifer during gatherings, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. Jennifer, too, began to sense Daniel's growing obsession. Initially flattered by his attention, she soon found it uncomfortable. His touches became more possessive, his words more intimate than appropriate. She discussed her discomfort with Mark, who brushed it off, believing Daniel was just more expressive in his affections. Mark's nonchalance left Jennifer feeling isolated in her concerns. The turning point came during a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin. The couples had planned the getaway to reconnect and enjoy some time away from their routine. However, the trip only served to highlight Daniel's fixation. He monopolized Jennifer's time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension was palpable, and Jennifer's attempts to distance herself were met with subtle resistance from Daniel. One night, while sitting by the fire, Daniel made a comment that crossed the line. He spoke about leaving everything behind and starting fresh, just the two of them. Jennifer, shocked and unsettled, excused herself and went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Daniel again. This time he was less dismissive, but still refused to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. Linda's frustration grew as she realized the extent of Daniel's obsession. She loved her husband, but was increasingly aware that his infatuation with Jennifer could destroy their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic. He started to follow Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings, showing up at her yoga classes, and even appearing at her workplace under the guise of casual visits. Jennifer's unease turned to fear. She confided in a close friend, who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to take control, Jennifer decided to end the arrangement altogether. She hoped that by doing so, Daniel would return to his senses, and they could all move on from this chapter without causing further harm. One evening, while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel showed up at the Johnsons' house unannounced. Jennifer was taken aback but let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Daniel confessed his feelings for her, speaking of a future where they could be together openly. Jennifer, horrified, tried to reason with him, explaining that their arrangement was never meant to be more than a temporary excitement. As Daniel's declarations became more intense, Jennifer's fear turned to anger. She realized she needed to put an end to this before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. She told Daniel firmly that their arrangement was over and that he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Daniel, visibly shaken, tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. Over the next few days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he would come to his senses. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart. Linda knew her husband's obsession had gone too far, and while she wanted to support Jennifer, she also felt a twisted loyalty to Daniel. She promised Jennifer she would talk to him, hoping to defuse the situation. However, Daniel's obsession only deepened. He started showing up at Jennifer's work, waiting for her after hours, and leaving her messages expressing his undying love. Jennifer, feeling increasingly unsafe, decided to confront him one last time, hoping to make him understand the gravity of his actions. They met at a secluded park away from prying eyes. Jennifer reiterated that their arrangement was over and that his behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go and move on. Daniel, unable to accept her rejection, grew desperate. He accused her of leading him on and playing with his emotions. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted that they part ways and return to their respective marriages. Unbeknownst to them, Linda had followed Daniel to the park. She watched from a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the confrontation unfold. She could see the anguish on Daniel's face and the determination on Jennifer's. Linda knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she also feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation turned to anger. Jennifer's refusal to entertain his fantasies felt like a personal betrayal. He lashed out verbally, calling her names and accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, holding back tears, stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Linda, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things got out of hand. She stepped out of her hiding place and approached the two, her voice shaking as she called out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to snap Daniel out of his rage, and he turned to her, his expression a mix of confusion and relief. Jennifer, taking advantage of the distraction, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Linda, now alone with her husband, tried to calm him down. She reassured him that they would find a way to move past this, but inside she knew that their lives had been irreversibly changed. The affair had reached its breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had set off a chain of events that could not be undone. As the dust settled, the true extent of Daniel's obsession and the depths of Linda's complicity would soon come to light, leading to a tragic and violent conclusion. The confrontation at the park had left Daniel in a state of turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection and Linda's unexpected appearance had shaken him to his core. He returned home that night, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda, sensing the storm brewing within him, tried to soothe his troubled thoughts, but Daniel remained inconsolable. Over the next few days, Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic. He vacillated between bouts of intense anger and deep despondency. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over Jennifer's rejection and the perceived injustices he had suffered. Linda, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear growing. She knew something had to give, but she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold. Jennifer, on the other hand, was determined to move forward. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her relationship with Mark. She hadn't told her husband the full extent of Daniel's obsession, fearing his reaction and the potential fallout. She hoped that by cutting ties, Daniel would eventually come to terms with the end of their arrangement and leave her alone. One evening, Jennifer returned home from work to find Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart sank at the sight of him, and she steeled herself for another confrontation. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but firm as she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes wild with desperation, begged her for one last chance to explain himself. Jennifer, sensing the futility of the conversation, tried to walk past him, but Daniel grabbed her arm. His grip was tight and painful, and Jennifer could see the madness in his eyes. She struggled to break free, her voice rising as she demanded he let go. The noise attracted the attention of a neighbor, who stepped outside to see what was happening. Seeing the neighbor, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Jennifer, shaken and frightened, thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. She called Linda, hoping to find some way to resolve the situation without involving the police. Linda, hearing the fear in Jennifer's voice, agreed to meet with her the next day to discuss how to handle Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The next day, Linda met Jennifer at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, explained the encounter with Daniel and her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. She promised Jennifer that she would talk to Daniel and make him understand that their relationship was over. After the meeting, Linda returned home to find Daniel in a state of agitation. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Daniel, feeling cornered, lashed out at her, accusing her of taking Jennifer's side and betraying him. The argument escalated, and Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him and that his own wife was against him. In his twisted mind, he believed that the only way to resolve the situation was to eliminate the source of his pain. He decided that if he couldn't have Jennifer, no one could. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house. He knew Mark was out of town, leaving Jennifer alone. He broke in through a side window and made his way to the bedroom where Jennifer lay sleeping. The sight of her, peaceful and unaware, fueled his rage and desperation. He grabbed a kitchen knife and approached her, his mind filled with a chaotic mix of love and hatred. Jennifer awoke to the sight of Daniel standing over her, the knife gleaming in the dim light. She tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth, his grip strong and unyielding. In a fit of rage, He plunged the knife into her chest, silencing her cries. As Jennifer's life slipped away, Daniel stood over her, his mind a haze of conflicting emotions. In the aftermath of the murder, Daniel fled the scene, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. He returned home, where Linda found him trembling and incoherent. She realized immediately what he had done, and in a moment of twisted loyalty, she decided to help him cover up the crime. The life they had built, the secrets they had kept, were all at stake. Linda knew that if they were to survive, they needed to act quickly and decisively. Linda, driven by a twisted sense of loyalty and self-preservation, quickly took control of the situation. She led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his clothes and wash off the blood. Her mind raced with the urgency of their predicament. She knew they had to act fast to cover up the crime and protect their secret life. As Daniel stood under the hot shower, the water turning pink around his feet, Linda gathered his clothes and placed them in a plastic bag. She scrubbed the floor where he had walked, making sure to eliminate any trace of blood. Once Daniel was cleaned up, she sat him down and forced him to recount every detail of what had happened. Despite his emotional state, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice shaking with the weight of his actions. Linda devised a plan. They needed to create an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She called a trusted friend, claiming that Daniel had been with her all evening, ensuring their alibi was backed up. Then, she drove to a secluded area outside of town, where she burned Daniel's blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon, praying that the fire would consume any remaining evidence. The police questioned everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel, although visibly distressed, managed to avoid raising suspicion. The investigation seemed to stall, with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners. Despite their initial success in evading the authorities, the psychological toll of the murder weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He withdrew from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Linda, while outwardly composed, felt the strain of their secret pressing down on her. She became hyper-vigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks following Jennifer's murder were a blur of tension and deception for the Garners. Linda took on the role of the stabilizer, managing Daniel's paranoia while ensuring their public facade remained intact. She monitored the news for any updates on the investigation, relieved that the police seemed to have no solid leads. However, Linda knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to create a narrative that would divert attention away from Daniel. She suggested to Daniel that he should appear more distraught over Jennifer's death, to align with the community's grief and to throw off any suspicion. At social gatherings and community meetings, Daniel played the part of the grieving friend. He spoke of Jennifer with a mix of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mark, devastated and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Daniel's empathy, never suspecting his friend's involvement in his wife's death. Daniel's mental state deteriorated further, his guilt manifesting in nightmares and hallucinations. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in alcohol but finding only temporary escape. Linda, fearing he might confess in a drunken stupor, kept a close eye on him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Daniel sat slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down. He confessed to Linda that he couldn't live with the guilt any longer, that he needed to come clean. Linda, panicked, tried to calm him down. To help maintain their composure, Linda suggested they take a short trip out of town. They traveled to a secluded cabin in the mountains, hoping the change of scenery would help Daniel regain some semblance of peace. The isolation provided a temporary respite, allowing them to plan their next steps without the constant pressure of the investigation looming over them. During their time at the cabin, Linda reinforced the importance of their secrecy. She coached Daniel on how to handle police questioning and public interactions, drilling him until he could respond without hesitation. Linda's determination to protect their lifestyle and avoid imprisonment fueled her relentless drive to keep their story straight. Upon returning to Pine Hill, the Garners resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel, though still haunted by his actions, managed to present a more stable front. Linda continued to manage their interactions with the community, ensuring they remained above suspicion. However, the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Daniel's increased drinking and erratic behavior, and whispers of his possible involvement in Jennifer's death began to circulate. Linda, ever vigilant, worked to quash the rumors, but she knew their time was running out. As the police investigation continued, new evidence came to light, pointing towards inconsistencies in Daniel's alibi. The Garners' carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse, and the truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. Detective Mitchell interviewed the Garners separately, noting any discrepancies in their stories. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel's emotional state seemed consistent with that of a grieving friend. However, Mitchell's instincts told her there was more to the story. As the weeks passed, new evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Jennifer's phone records revealed a series of increasingly desperate text messages from Daniel, indicating his obsession with her. Mitchell brought Daniel in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi and the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, stuck to the story Linda had coached him on, but his nervousness and evasive answers only heightened the detective's suspicions. The turning point came when a neighbor came forward with crucial information. They had seen Daniel's car parked near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder and remembered the strange behavior he had exhibited. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence and Daniel's erratic behavior, was enough for the police to obtain a search warrant for the Garners' home. During the search, the police found remnants of the burned clothing and traces of blood that had seeped into the floorboards, despite Linda's thorough cleaning. This damning evidence, coupled with the witness testimony and phone records, painted a clear picture of Daniel's guilt. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda realized that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. She knew that their only chance of escaping a lengthy prison sentence was to come up with a new plan, one that would shift the blame away from them and onto someone else. As the police closed in, Linda and Daniel faced the harsh reality of their situation. The lies and deceit that had once protected them were now threatening to unravel completely, and the truth was about to be revealed in a way they could never have anticipated. As the evidence against Daniel mounted, Detective Mitchell prepared to make her move. She brought Daniel in for another round of questioning, this time with a different approach. She laid out all the evidence they had gathered, the phone records, the witness testimonies, and the forensic findings. Daniel, cornered and overwhelmed, began to crack under the pressure. Mitchell pressed harder, suggesting that if Daniel came clean, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Daniel, unable to handle the weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, finally broke down. He confessed to killing Jennifer, describing his obsession, the confrontation, and the moment he lost control. However, in his confession, Daniel also implicated Linda, revealing her role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and craft an alibi. Mitchell, sensing the opportunity to get the full story, had Linda brought in for questioning as well. Confronted with Daniel's confession, Linda initially denied any involvement, but as Mitchell detailed the evidence and Daniel's account, Linda realized there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. She admitted to helping Daniel, explaining that she had done it out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of losing everything they had built. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated Pine Hill and the surrounding region. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, eager to see the conclusion of the tragic tale. Daniel, charged with first-degree murder, and Linda, charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice, both pled guilty to their respective charges. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda, despite her role in the cover-up, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and her previously clean record. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. Mark Johnson, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in the justice served, but continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife. At the center of this tragic story were three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Oliver Holbrook, a charismatic local businessman; Taylor Tanner, a devoted elementary school teacher, and Claire Reeves, a newcomer with a mysterious past. Their fates collided in a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and deceit that would leave two of them dead and the third forever changed. Oliver Holbrook was born and raised in Millbrook, the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Holbrook. From an early age, it was clear that Oliver was destined for success. His father, a prominent local attorney, instilled in him a strong work ethic and an unwavering ambition. His mother, a former beauty queen turned socialite, taught him the art of charm and social grace. Growing up, Oliver excelled in both academics and athletics. He was captain of the high school football team, president of the student council, and valedictorian of his graduating class. After high school, Oliver attended an Ivy League university where he studied business and economics. But there was another side to Oliver Holbrook, one that few people saw. Behind his winning smile and easy charm lay a calculating mind and an insatiable hunger for control. He was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them for his own gain. In both business and his personal life, Oliver viewed relationships as transactions, always looking for what he could get out of them. Despite his success, Oliver was never satisfied. He craved constant validation and attention, a need that manifested in a string of romantic conquests. He was known as a ladies' man, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. But as he approached his mid-30s, Oliver began to feel the pressure to settle down, at least outwardly. He knew that having a wife would enhance his image as a respectable businessman and pillar of the community. It was with this mindset that Oliver entered into relationships with both Taylor Tanner and Claire Reeves. In Taylor, he saw the perfect candidate for the role of Mrs. Holbrook, attractive, well-liked, and from a good family. Claire, on the other hand, represented excitement and passion, a secret indulgence he had no intention of giving up. Little did Oliver know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, set in motion by the very women he thought he could control. Taylor Tanner was the epitome of the girl next door. Born and raised in Millbrook, she was the middle child in a family of 5, with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her parents, Michael and Linda Tanner, were pillars of the community. Her father was the town's beloved family doctor, and her mother was a longtime volunteer at the local animal shelter. Taylor's childhood was marked by warmth and stability. The Tanner household was always bustling with activity, filled with laughter, and the aroma of her mother's home-cooked meals. This nurturing environment shaped Taylor into a compassionate and empathetic young woman, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear to those in need. Upon completing her degree, Taylor secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary School. It was at a local charity event, organized to raise funds for the school's new library, that Taylor first met Oliver Holbrook. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Oliver wooed Taylor with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Taylor, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Claire Reeves arrived in Millbrook like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Taylor and Oliver, Claire was an outsider, having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of New York. Her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness, experiences that shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Claire was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Claire with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Claire was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Claire worked as a marketing executive in Manhattan for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Claire decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook. Claire was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Millbrook, Claire quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Claire first encountered Oliver Holbrook. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Oliver, Claire saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Claire and Oliver began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Claire's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Oliver's engagement to Taylor. This betrayal would trigger all of Claire's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Millbrook. As summer turned to fall in Millbrook, the lives of Oliver, Taylor, and Claire became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Oliver, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Taylor, Oliver played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Taylor basked in the glow of their engagement, excitedly sharing details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Oliver's encounters with Claire took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns, or at Claire's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Oliver showered Claire with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Taylor. He fed Claire's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Taylor. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Taylor and Claire. Even though Taylor remained unaware of the true nature of Claire's relationship with Oliver, the two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Claire's presence invariably drawing Oliver's attention away from his fiancée. Taylor, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Claire. Sensing the newcomer's loneliness, she invited Claire to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Oliver and Claire to cross paths. Claire, consumed by her feelings for Oliver and racked with guilt over betraying Taylor's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous towards Taylor and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Claire's apparent instability. Oliver observed the growing friction between the two women, with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affections. As autumn progressed, and the date of Oliver and Taylor's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Claire's demands for Oliver to leave Taylor grew more frequent and desperate, while Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Millbrook and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Oliver and Taylor's wedding arrived. The entire town of Millbrook seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Taylor, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face beaming with joy and love. Oliver stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom, but those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior. As he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Taylor for all eternity, his thoughts couldn't help but stray to Claire. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Claire was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the completion of the ceremony, Claire felt something inside her snap. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with the entire town celebrating the union of two of its most beloved residents. Taylor danced and laughed, surrounded by friends and family, while Oliver played his role to perfection, ever the charming and attentive new husband. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Oliver found his mask slipping. More than once, Taylor caught him staring off into the distance, a troubled expression on his face. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed off her concerns with a quick smile and a kiss. As the newlyweds drove off to their honeymoon, tin cans rattling behind their car and well wishes ringing in their ears, neither of them could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. For in the shadows, Claire Reeves was already plotting her revenge. In the weeks following Oliver and Taylor's wedding, Claire Reeves spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, a future with Oliver, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Oliver and Taylor's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Claire at every turn. As her pain deepened, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Claire's growing obsession with Taylor that truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young teacher, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Claire convinced herself that if she could just understand Taylor, figure out what made her so special in Oliver's eyes, she could win him back. Claire's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Taylor cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Taylor's life and her relationship with Oliver. As weeks turned into months, Claire's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Taylor was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Oliver's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Taylor moving away or realizing she didn't love Oliver after all. But gradually, Claire's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Claire maintained sporadic contact with Oliver. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Claire alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Taylor and icy accusations of betrayal. Oliver, growing uncomfortable with Claire's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Millbrook, Claire's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Taylor was not just for her own benefit, but for Oliver's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Oliver kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Taylor Tanner Holbrook left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Millbrook's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Taylor, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Taylor, Claire Reeves was waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Taylor's form appeared through the mist, Claire took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Claire, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Taylor's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Taylor an hour later. By then it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Claire's plan seemed to work perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Claire had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town both before and after the time of Taylor's death. Oliver, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower, struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Lisa Montague, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Taylor's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Taylor was gone. Now surely Oliver would be hers. But as the days passed and Oliver remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Taylor's death, Millbrook was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Montague's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Taylor. Oliver Holbrook maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Taylor's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Taylor's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Claire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her. Manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attacks, she obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Montague delved deeper into Taylor's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Oliver's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Taylor in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Claire. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Taylor's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calming in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Claire's alibi seemed airtight, but Montague sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Claire's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Oliver had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Taylor's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meetings. Frustrated and confused, Claire decided to confront Oliver at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Oliver in an intimate embrace with a woman she didn't recognize. The sight sent Claire reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on Claire. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. The realization was devastating. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Claire stormed into Oliver's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Claire unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Oliver of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Taylor. Oliver, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Claire that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Taylor's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Claire fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Oliver's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Claire was unaware that her confrontation with Oliver had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Claire had seen with Oliver was Olivia Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Oliver's firm. Olivia had been drawn into an affair with Oliver, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Claire, Olivia was not blind to Oliver's true nature. On the night of Claire's confrontation with Oliver, Olivia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Oliver's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Oliver continuing to play the role of grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Olivia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Oliver's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Taylor's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Olivia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Olivia confronted Oliver in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Claire to his fraudulent business practices. Oliver, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Olivia into silence. But Olivia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Oliver's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Oliver snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Olivia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Oliver didn't know was that Olivia, haunted by the fate of Taylor Tanner Holbrook, had come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Oliver Holbrook, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Claire Reeves, crumpled to the floor. Olivia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences, but she also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Oliver Holbrook's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Oliver Holbrook reverberated through Millbrook, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Taylor's death to light. As Olivia Chen was taken into custody, the true extent of Oliver's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Oliver Holbrook's death, the investigation into Taylor's murder took on new urgency. Detective Montague, armed with the evidence Olivia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Claire Reeves, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Taylor's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Oliver's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Claire, having confessed to Taylor's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Olivia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter, but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. The tragic tale of Oliver Holbrook, Taylor Tanner, Claire Reeves, and Olivia Chen would be remembered for years to come, a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces. Born Celeste DuPont in a small Louisiana town, the woman who would become Madame Celeste had a childhood steeped in poverty and superstition. Her mother, Yvette, was a practitioner of voodoo, while her father, Jean-Paul, was a charming con artist who drifted in and out of their lives. From an early age, Celeste learned the art of reading people, picking up on subtle cues and body language that would later serve her well in her chosen profession. As a child, Celeste was often left to her own devices, spending hours exploring the bayou and listening to the stories of local elders. She was particularly drawn to tales of the supernatural, soaking up every bit of folklore and mysticism she could find. It was during this time that she first claimed to have visions, describing vivid dreams that seemed to predict future events. As she entered her teenage years, Celeste's natural beauty and newfound abilities made her the talk of the town. She began to hold seances for her classmates, charging small fees for her services. It was during one of these sessions that she met Thomas, a charismatic drifter who recognized her talent for deception. Together, they embarked on a series of small-time cons across the South, posing as faith healers and fortune-tellers. Their partnership, both romantic and professional, lasted for several years until a scam went wrong. Thomas was arrested, but Celeste managed to evade the authorities. It was then that she decided to reinvent herself, dyeing her hair and adopting the persona of Madame Celeste, the mysterious psychic from Europe. With her new identity, Celeste moved from town to town, honing her craft and building a reputation. She learned to cold read, to manipulate emotions, and to exploit the grief and desperation of her clients. Her cons grew more elaborate, and her fees more exorbitant. It was in Aviara Cove that Madame Celeste set up her most ambitious operation yet. Little did she know that her pursuit of true supernatural power would lead her down a path of no return, culminating in a crime that would shake the foundations of her carefully constructed world. Robert and Elizabeth Morin were the epitome of old money and social grace. Their sprawling estate on the outskirts of Aviara Cove was a testament to generations of wealth accumulated through shrewd investments and inherited fortune. Robert, in his early 60s, had made a name for himself in the world of finance, while Elizabeth was known for her philanthropic efforts and impeccable taste. The Morins had moved to Aviara Cove 5 years ago, seeking a quieter life away from the bustle of New York City. They quickly became pillars of the community, hosting lavish charity galas and contributing generously to local causes. Their fairy tale romance and seemingly perfect life were the envy of many in town. However, beneath the polished exterior lay a web of secrets and unfulfilled desires. Robert, despite his business acumen, harbored a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had worked for. This paranoia led him to make increasingly risky investments, seeking to multiply his wealth to ensure his legacy. Elizabeth, on the other hand, struggled with the loss of her twin sister in a car accident years ago, an event that left her with a profound sense of guilt and a desperate need for closure. It was Elizabeth who first heard of Madame Celeste through the town's gossip mill. Initially skeptical, she found herself drawn to the idea of communicating with her lost sister. Robert, ever the pragmatist, dismissed the notion of psychics and mediums as nonsense, but as he watched his wife sink deeper into melancholy, he reluctantly agreed to accompany her to a session with the renowned psychic. The Morins' decision to seek out Madame Celeste would prove to be fateful. Their wealth, combined with their emotional vulnerabilities, made them the perfect marks for the cunning psychic. As they made there for their first appointment, neither Robert nor Elizabeth could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. They were about to step into a world where their deepest fears and most fervent hopes would be used against them, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed and horror. The first meeting between Madame Celeste and the Morins took place on a crisp autumn evening. As the couple entered the dimly lit parlor, they were immediately enveloped by the heady scent of incense and the soft glow of candles. Madame Celeste, resplendent in a deep purple gown adorned with silver stars, greeted them with a knowing smile that seemed to pierce their very souls. Elizabeth, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and trepidation, spoke first. "Madame Celeste, I've heard so much about you and we hope you can help us." The psychic's gaze lingered on Elizabeth, noting the slight tremor in her voice and the way she clutched her husband's arm. Without missing a beat, Madame Celeste responded, "The spirits have been expecting you, my dear. I sense a great loss in your past, a piece of yourself torn away." Elizabeth gasped, her grip on Robert tightening. Robert, meanwhile, remained stoic, his skepticism evident in the tight set of his jaw. Madame Celeste turned her attention to him, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone. "And you, sir, carry the weight of many responsibilities. The future weighs heavily on your mind." Over the next hour, Madame Celeste wove a tapestry of half-truths and educated guesses, expertly reading the couple's reactions and tailoring her revelations to their responses. She spoke of Elizabeth's sister, describing her with just enough accuracy to be convincing, and hinted at messages from beyond the veil. For Robert, she alluded to business opportunities and potential pitfalls, her vague prophecies playing into his financial anxieties. By the end of the session, Elizabeth was in tears, feeling a connection to her lost sister that she hadn't experienced in years. Even Robert, despite his initial skepticism, found himself unsettled by the accuracy of some of Madame Celeste's insights. As they left, both agreed to return for further consultations. Over the next few weeks, the Morins became regular visitors. Madame Celeste carefully cultivated their trust, each session revealing just enough to keep them coming back for more. She began to suggest more elaborate rituals and expensive offerings to enhance their connection to the spirit world. For Elizabeth, these sessions became a lifeline, a way to assuage her guilt and find peace. Robert, while still harboring doubts, couldn't deny the positive change in his wife's demeanor. Slowly but surely, Madame Celeste was weaving her web around the wealthy couple, drawing them deeper into her world of shadows and secrets. Little did the Morans know that with each visit, they were inching closer to a fate far darker than they could have ever imagined. Madame Celeste's demands became more extravagant with each passing day. She insisted on rare crystals and precious metals for energy focus, exotic herbs and incense for purification, and even suggested that the Morans donate significant sums to various charitable causes to curry favor with the spirits. In reality, these donations were funneled into offshore accounts controlled by Celeste herself. The psychic's manipulation extended beyond mere financial exploitation. She began to insinuate herself into every aspect of the Morans' lives. Late-night phone calls became common, with Celeste claiming to have urgent messages from the beyond. She advised Robert on business decisions, conveniently aligning her visions with her own financial interests. For Elizabeth, she became a confidant, slowly isolating her from friends and family under the guise of spiritual protection. As her influence grew, so did Madame Celeste's obsession with the occult. The rituals she performed for the Morans became darker, incorporating elements of blood magic and sacrificial rites. She spoke of ancient powers and forbidden knowledge, her eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on madness. The Morans, too deep in her thrall to see the danger, followed her lead without question. Behind closed doors, Celeste pored over arcane texts, convinced that she was on the brink of unlocking true supernatural power. Her sessions with other clients became perfunctory, her focus entirely on the Morans and the potential they represented. In her twisted mind, their wealth and willingness to follow her every command made them the perfect vessels for a grand ritual she was planning. As her plans took shape, Madame Celeste began to lay the groundwork for her ultimate con. She spoke to the Morans of a great awakening that would require them to sever all ties with their old life. Under her guidance, they began to liquidate assets and make preparations to transfer large sums of money. Robert, his business acumen clouded by Celeste's influence, failed to see the red flags that would have been obvious in any other circumstance. Elizabeth, lost in her grief and the promise of eternal connection with her sister, was willing to go to any lengths Madame Celeste suggested. The stage was set for a tragedy of epic proportions. Madame Celeste, her grip on reality slipping with each passing day, had convinced herself that the murder of the Morans would be the key to unlocking limitless power. She meticulously planned every detail, from the ritual site to the method of disposing of the bodies. As the night of the Great Awakening approached, an air of anticipation settled. The Morans, unaware of the fate that awaited them, prepared for what they believed would be a spiritual rebirth. At precisely midnight, the Morans arrived, dressed in the white robes Celeste had provided. Their eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as they followed the psychic through the house and into the backyard. Robert clutched a briefcase containing documents for the transfer of their wealth, a necessary step for spiritual unburdening, as Celeste had explained. As they entered the clearing, Elizabeth gasped at the elaborate setup. A large pentagram had been drawn on the ground with what appeared to be ash, surrounded by flickering candles and strange symbols. At its center stood the altar, adorned with crystals, feathers, and a large silver chalice. Madame Celeste began the ritual, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic chant. The words, a mix of Latin and gibberish, washed over the Morans, lulling them into a trance-like state. As the chanting intensified, Celeste instructed the couple to lie down within the pentagram, their heads toward the altar. With practiced movements, she bound their wrists and ankles with silk cords, explaining that it was to anchor their spirits during the transition. The Morans offered no resistance, their minds clouded by the intoxicating blend of incense and blind faith. As the ritual reached its climax, Madame Celeste's demeanor changed. The mask of the benevolent spiritual guide slipped away, revealing the cold, calculating eyes of a killer. From beneath the altar, she retrieved an ornate dagger, its blade glinting in the moonlight. Elizabeth was the first to realize something was terribly wrong. She began to struggle against her bonds, her voice rising in panic. Robert, shaken from his stupor by his wife's cries, demanded to know what was happening, but it was too late. With swift, brutal efficiency, Madame Celeste plunged the dagger into Elizabeth's chest. The woman's scream was cut short as blood bubbled from her lips. Robert roared in anguish and fury, thrashing wildly against his restraints. Celeste turned to him, her face spattered with his wife's blood, and brought the dagger down again and again. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the gurgling of the dying couple, Madame Celeste began to collect their blood in the silver chalice. Her movements were methodical, almost reverent, as she muttered incantations under her breath. She truly believed that this act of supreme sacrifice would grant her the power she had long sought. As life ebbed from the Morans, Madame Celeste completed her grisly task. She dipped her fingers in the blood-filled chalice and began to draw symbols on her own skin, her eyes wild with a terrible ecstasy. In her madness, she failed to notice the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The ritual concluded. Celeste stood over the bodies of her victims, arms outstretched, waiting for the rush of power she was certain would come. But as the minutes ticked by, all she felt was a growing sense of panic and the cold realization of what she had done. With trembling hands, she began the process of cleaning up the crime scene. She had planned for this, but the reality of disposing of 2 bodies was far more daunting than she had anticipated. As she dragged the corpses towards a pre-dug grave deeper in the woods, her mind raced with plans to secure the Morans' wealth and flee Aviara Cove. In the pale light of dawn, Madame Celeste surveyed the scene of her gruesome crime. The once pristine clearing was now a tableau of horror, with blood-soaked earth and the lingering stench of death. She had managed to bury the bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Moran in the deep grave she had prepared, but evidence of the murder still littered the area. With a growing sense of panic, Celeste began the painstaking process of erasing all traces of the night's events. She gathered the blood-stained robes, the ritual implements, and the now empty chalice, stuffing them into heavy garbage bags. The pentagram was scuffed out, leaves and branches scattered over the disturbed earth. As she worked, Celeste's mind raced. She needed to establish an alibi, to create a narrative that would explain the Morans' sudden disappearance. Rushing back to the house, she showered, scrubbing away every speck of blood and dirt. She then set about creating a paper trail, forging emails and documents that suggested the couple had been planning a secret getaway. Using the information she had gleaned from her sessions with the Morans, Celeste began the complex process of accessing their accounts. She had coerced them into sharing passwords and account details under the guise of spiritual unburdening. Now, those same details would allow her to siphon off their considerable wealth. As morning turned to afternoon, Celeste made a series of calls. To the Morans' housekeeper, she explained that the couple had left for an emergency business trip. To their few close friends, she expressed concern that she hadn't heard from them since their last session. She even went so far as to call the local police, reporting that the Morans had missed an important appointment and weren't answering their phones. But even as she wove her web of lies, Celeste could feel it all unraveling. The hasty cleanup of the crime scene, the rushed cover-up, it all felt inadequate. She hadn't anticipated the overwhelming guilt and fear that now consumed her. Every car that drove past the house, every unexpected noise made her jump. As evening approached, a knock at the door sent Celeste into a panic. It was Detective Malika Collins, responding to the missing persons report Celeste herself had filed. The psychic invited her in, forcing a calm demeanor as she recounted her concerns about the Morans. Detective Collins listened intently, her keen eyes taking in every detail of Celeste's home and behavior. She asked pointed questions about the couple's last known whereabouts and their relationship with Celeste. Though the psychic maintained her composure, she could sense the detective's suspicion. As Collins left, promising to keep Celeste informed of any developments, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on the self-proclaimed psychic. She realized that her pursuit of power and wealth had led her down a path from which there was no return. The once confident Madame Celeste was now a woman on the edge, waiting for the inevitable moment when her crimes would be discovered. Detective Malika Collins had been with the Aviara Cove Police Department for 15 years, and something about the Moran disappearance case didn't sit right with her from the start. Her instincts, honed by years on the force, told her that Madame Celeste knew more than she was letting on. In the days following her initial visit, Collins dove deep into the investigation. She interviewed the Morans' friends, colleagues, and household staff. A pattern quickly emerged. In the months leading up to their disappearance, the couple had become increasingly isolated, their behavior erratic and secretive. Collins's attention focused on their connection to Madame Celeste. She discovered that large sums of money had been flowing from the Morin's accounts to various shell companies and offshore banks. When she traced these transactions, she found a complex web of financial maneuvers that all seemed to lead back to the psychic. Intrigued by Celeste's background, Collins began to dig into her past. She uncovered a trail of complaints and suspicions spanning several states, all related to psychic fraud and con artistry. The detective realized she was dealing with a sophisticated criminal, one who had managed to stay one step ahead of the law for years. As Collins delved deeper, she started interviewing Celeste's other clients. Many spoke of the psychic with reverence, but a few shared stories of feeling manipulated and pressured to part with large sums of money. One client, an elderly widow, tearfully recounted how Celeste had tried to convince her to sell her home and invest the proceeds in a spiritual cleansing ritual. The detective's suspicions grew when forensic analysis of the Morin's computer revealed deleted emails discussing a Great Awakening ritual with Madame Celeste. The language used was cryptic, but it was clear that the couple had been planning something significant for the night they vanished. Armed with this information, Collins obtained a warrant to search her property. As her team combed through Celeste's home and the woods behind it, the detective couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering something terrible. Little did she know that buried deep in those woods lay the gruesome truth of what had really happened to Robert and Elizabeth Morin. The search of Madame Celeste's property yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Hidden in a false bottom of her antique writing desk, detectives discovered a journal detailing her deepening obsession with the occult and her plans for the Morins. The basement revealed a makeshift laboratory where she had been experimenting with various hallucinogenic compounds, likely used to enhance her clients' spiritual experiences. But it was the discovery in the woods that broke the case wide open. A cadaver dog, brought in to search the expansive property, alerted to a spot deep in the forest. As police excavated the area, they unearthed the badly decomposed bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Morin. Detective Collins, watching as the bodies were exhumed, felt a mix of vindication and horror. Her instincts had been right, but the truth was far more gruesome than she had imagined. Forensic analysis would later reveal traces of the ritual, including remnants of candle wax and unfamiliar herbs on the victim's remains. With this damning evidence in hand, Collins moved to arrest Madame Celeste, but the psychic, perhaps foreseeing the net closing around her, had fled. As the search for Celeste continued, Collins pieced together the full extent of her crimes. Financial records showed that she had managed to transfer millions from the Morin's accounts in the days following their murder. Interviews with other clients revealed a pattern of exploitation going back years. The detective also uncovered Celeste's true identity as Celeste Dupont, connecting her to unsolved cases of fraud and theft across multiple states. It became clear that the Morin murders were the culmination of a lifetime of increasingly bold and dangerous cons. Law enforcement tracked Celeste to a remote cabin in the Adirondacks. As police surrounded the property, Celeste attempted to flee into the woods. In a tense standoff, Collins confronted the self-proclaimed psychic, who was now a shell of her former confident self. "Madame Celeste or Celeste Dupont, your crimes have caught up with you," Collins called out. "There's nowhere left to run." For a moment it seemed Celeste might try to fight or flee, but then, as if all the fight had left her at once, she sank to her knees in the damp forest floor. As Collins approached to make the arrest, Celeste looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of defeat and something else, a lingering madness that sent chills down the detective's spine. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, from financial records showing the systematic draining of the Morin's accounts to the chilling contents of Celeste's personal journals. Forensic experts detailed the brutal nature of the murders, while psychologists attempted to unravel the defendant's complex psyche. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Thomas, Celeste's former partner. He provided insight into her early cons and the evolution of her tactics, painting a picture of a woman whose greed and delusions of grandeur had spiraled out of control. Celeste's defense team attempted to argue that she was not of sound mind, presenting evidence of her deep-seated belief in the occult and her conviction that the murders were part of a genuine ritual. They portrayed her as a victim of her own delusions, manipulated by the very forces she thought she was channeling. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that Celeste's apparent madness was intertwined with a calculating intelligence. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, citing the heinous nature of the crimes and Celeste's lack of genuine remorse, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Donald and Violet Dawson were the golden couple of Riverview. They moved into their elegant two-story house on Maple Street 5 years ago, quickly becoming popular in the tight-knit community. Donald's wit and charm made him a favorite at neighborhood gatherings, while Violet's warm smile and artistic talent endeared her to everyone she met. Together they hosted barbecues, attended charity events, and were often seen jogging together in the mornings, embodying the image of marital bliss. Donald's career as a financial analyst was thriving. He had a keen eye for investments and was climbing the corporate ladder with impressive speed. His colleagues admired his work ethic and sharp mind, often turning to him for advice on financial matters. Violet, on the other hand, ran a successful freelance graphic design business from home. Her designs were in high demand, and she had a loyal client base that appreciated her creativity and attention to detail. Their social circle included other young professionals and couples who often praised their relationship. They seemed to complement each other perfectly. Donald was the outgoing, ambitious partner, while Violet provided a nurturing and supportive presence. They had no children, but they doted on their golden retriever, Max, treating him like their own child. To anyone looking in from the outside, Donald and Violet had it all. But as the months turned into years, small cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. The first signs of trouble were the minor arguments over mundane household matters. Violet would complain about Donald leaving his clothes on the floor or not doing his share of the chores. Donald, in turn, would criticize Violet for her spending habits or the way she managed her time. These disagreements were brushed off as normal marital spats, but they hinted at deeper issues lurking beneath the surface. Their friends noticed the change but didn't think much of it. After all, every couple had their moments of discord. However, those who spent more time with the Dawsons sensed a growing tension. Violet's laughter seemed more forced, and Donald's affectionate gestures appeared increasingly performative. Yet in public, they maintained their image of the perfect couple, never letting their private conflicts spill into their social life. Despite these early signs, Donald and Violet continued to present a united front. They celebrated anniversaries with lavish dinners and weekend getaways, posted loving messages on social media, and attended couples therapy sessions to work on their issues. But behind closed doors, the fights grew more frequent and intense, setting the stage for the dark and twisted events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. As the months went by, the arguments between Donald and Violet became more frequent and intense. The issues that once seemed trivial now escalated into full-blown fights. Donald's controlling behavior began to surface, and Violet's frustration grew with each passing day. The idyllic image of their marriage was slowly disintegrating, revealing a toxic dynamic that neither of them could escape. Donald's control over Violet extended beyond the household chores. He began dictating how she should dress, whom she could meet, and even how she should spend her free time. Violet, once an independent and confident woman, found herself constantly walking on eggshells trying to avoid Donald's wrath. She started to withdraw from her friends, making excuses for not attending social events or meeting for coffee. Her friends noticed the change, but were unsure how to approach the subject. One evening, during a dinner party at their home, the tension between Donald and Violet was palpable. Violet accidentally spilled wine on the tablecloth, and Donald's reaction was swift and harsh. He berated her in front of their guests, his face contorted with anger. The room fell silent, the awkwardness thick in the air. Violet apologized meekly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Their friends exchanged uneasy glances, but tried to carry on with the evening, not wanting to exacerbate the situation. After the guests left, Donald continued his tirade. Violet tried to defend herself, but her words only seemed to fuel his anger. It was during these moments that Violet glimpsed the darker side of Donald, a side that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The man she had once admired and loved was now a source of fear and anxiety. Violet confided in her sister Rachel about the growing issues in her marriage. Rachel was shocked to hear about Donald's behavior, as he had always been charming and respectful around her. She urged Violet to consider leaving him, but Violet was hesitant. She still loved Donald and hoped that their issues could be resolved through therapy and open communication. Donald, on the other hand, dismissed the idea of therapy. He believed that Violet was overreacting and that their problems were normal marital issues. He continued to exert control over every aspect of Violet's life. From her work to her friendships, Violet felt increasingly isolated and trapped, her once vibrant personality dimming under the weight of Donald's dominance. The unraveling of Donald and Violet's marriage was rooted in their pasts, hidden traumas and manipulative tendencies that had remained buried until now. Donald's need for control stemmed from his childhood, where he grew up in a household dominated by his tyrannical father. Witnessing his mother's submissiveness and his father's oppressive behavior, Donald internalized the notion that control was synonymous with love and respect. Violet's past was marked by a different kind of trauma. She had been in an abusive relationship during her college years, which left her with deep emotional scars. She had worked hard to rebuild her life, seeking therapy and finding solace in her career. Meeting Donald had seemed like a fresh start, a chance to leave her painful past behind. But as the years went by, the echoes of her past trauma resurfaced, exacerbated by Donald's controlling behavior. Their marriage, which had once seemed like a partnership of equals, transformed into a battleground of wills. Donald's manipulative tendencies became more pronounced, and Violet's hidden traumas were exploited. Donald would use Violet's past against her, belittling her experiences and making her feel unworthy of love and respect. He manipulated her emotions, alternating between affectionate gestures and harsh criticisms, leaving Violet constantly second-guessing herself. Violet's attempts to seek help from friends or family were often thwarted by Donald's interference. He would charm her friends, making them believe that Violet was exaggerating or being overly sensitive. He isolated her from those who could offer support, ensuring that she remained dependent on him. Violet's cries for help were met with skepticism, as Donald's outward charm and charisma masked his true nature. The twisted game of manipulation and control escalated over time. Donald would gaslight Violet, making her doubt her own perceptions and memories. He would hide her belongings, then accuse her of being forgetful. He would criticize her appearance and decisions, undermining her confidence. Violet, caught in this web of psychological abuse, felt her sense of reality slipping away. Despite the escalating abuse, Violet clung to the hope that things could change. She believed that if she just tried harder, if she just loved Donald enough, things would go back to the way they were. She blamed herself for the growing tension, convinced that she was the problem. Donald reinforced this belief, using it to tighten his grip on her. The turning point in Donald and Violet's tumultuous relationship came one night during an argument that escalated beyond verbal altercations. It started as a typical disagreement over household chores, but the tension quickly mounted. Donald's face twisted with anger as he accused Violet of being lazy and ungrateful. Violet, her patience worn thin, snapped back, telling Donald that she was tired of his constant criticism and control. The argument spiraled out of control, with both of them shouting and hurling accusations. Donald's anger boiled over, and for the first time he struck Violet. The force of the blow sent her reeling, her cheek stinging from the impact. The room fell silent, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Donald, momentarily stunned by his own actions, quickly regained his composure and began to apologize profusely. He promised it would never happen again, blaming the stress from work and the pressures of life. Violet, shocked and hurt, didn't know how to respond. She had never imagined that their arguments would turn physical. Despite her fear, a part of her still clung to the hope that Donald could change. She accepted his apology, convincing herself that it was a one-time incident, an unfortunate outburst that wouldn't be repeated. But the physical abuse didn't stop. Over the following weeks, Donald's outbursts became more frequent and violent. Violet tried to hide the bruises, making excuses for her injuries when friends or colleagues asked. She became adept at covering up the signs of abuse, using makeup to mask the bruises and long sleeves to hide the marks. Her once vibrant spirit was replaced by a shadow of her former self, her eyes reflecting a deep-seated fear and sadness. In a desperate attempt to break free from the cycle of abuse, Violet confided in her closest friend, Kate. She told Kate about the physical violence and Donald's controlling behavior, hoping that sharing her secret would give her the strength to leave. Kate was horrified and immediately offered her support, urging Violet to contact a domestic violence hotline and seek help. Violet took Kate's advice and called the hotline. Speaking to a counselor who provided her with resources and a safety plan, she started to make preparations to leave, gathering important documents and saving money in a hidden account. Violet felt a glimmer of hope, believing that she could escape the nightmare her life had become. However, Donald's control over Violet was stronger than she anticipated. He grew suspicious of her actions, noticing the small changes in her behavior and the secretive nature of her movements. His paranoia intensified, and he began to monitor her closely, checking her phone and following her when she left the house. Violet's attempts to break free were thwarted at every turn as Donald tightened his grip on her life. The breaking point came when Violet tried to leave one night, only to be caught by Donald as she was sneaking out of the house with a suitcase. Enraged, Donald dragged her back inside, accusing her of betrayal and threatening her with dire consequences if she ever tried to leave again. Violet, terrified and defeated, realized that escaping Donald's control was more difficult than she had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Donald's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed surveillance cameras in the house, monitored Violet's every move, and cut off her access to the outside world. Violet felt like a prisoner in her own home, her every action scrutinized and controlled. The glimmer of hope that had once sustained her was extinguished, replaced by a sense of despair and resignation. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached a dangerous new level, with Donald's paranoia and violence threatening to consume them both. Despite the overwhelming fear and isolation, Violet continued to hold on to a sliver of hope. She documented the abuse in a hidden journal, detailing each incident with meticulous care. One night, after a particularly violent argument, Violet decided she couldn't take it anymore. The fight had started over a minor issue, Donald accusing her of not cooking dinner to his liking, but it quickly escalated. Donald's rage was uncontrollable, and he beat Violet until she was barely conscious. As she lay on the floor, battered and bleeding, Violet made a silent vow to escape no matter the cost. Over the next few days, Violet meticulously planned her escape. She reached out to Kate through a coded message, arranging a time and place to meet. Kate, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed to help without hesitation. On the night of their planned escape, Violet waited until Donald was asleep before making her move. She quietly gathered her pre-packed bag and slipped out of the house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the meeting spot, every shadow and sound amplifying her fear. Kate was waiting at the designated spot, her car idling and ready to go. Violet climbed into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she clutched her bag. Kate didn't waste any time, driving away from the house as quickly as possible. The sense of relief Violet felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that her freedom was still fragile. They drove to a nearby town, where Kate had arranged for Violet to stay at a women's shelter. The shelter provided a safe haven, a place where Violet could begin to rebuild her life without fear of Donald's retribution. The staff at the shelter were supportive and understanding, helping Violet navigate the legal process of obtaining a restraining order and pressing charges against Donald. For the first time in years, Violet felt a glimmer of hope. She was surrounded by people who believed her, who validated her experiences, and provided her with the support she desperately needed. The journey to recovery was daunting, but Violet was determined to reclaim her life and break free from the cycle of abuse. However, Donald was not willing to let go so easily. When he discovered Violet's absence, his rage knew no bounds. He used every resource at his disposal to track her down, refusing to accept that she had escaped his control. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached its final, deadly stage, setting the stage for a confrontation that would have tragic consequences. Violet had been staying at the women's shelter for a few weeks, slowly beginning to heal and regain her sense of self. The staff and other residents provided a supportive community, helping her navigate the complexities of her situation. She had obtained a restraining order against Donald, and the shelter had taken measures to ensure her safety. However, Donald's obsession with Violet only grew stronger in her absence. He scoured social media to track her down. His need to control her had reached a dangerous level, driven by a toxic mix of anger, jealousy, and possessiveness. Donald's paranoia and determination to reclaim Violet culminated in a meticulously planned confrontation. On the night of June 27th, Donald finally discovered Violet's location. He had been stalking the shelter for days, watching and waiting for the right moment. When he saw Violet leave the shelter to run an errand, he followed her, careful to remain undetected. Violet was unaware of his presence, her mind occupied with thoughts of her new life and the steps she needed to take to move forward. As Violet returned to the shelter, she felt a strange unease, a sense that something was not right. She quickened her pace, her heart racing as she approached the shelter's entrance. Before she could reach the door, Donald appeared, blocking her path. The look in his eyes was a chilling combination of rage and determination. Donald's voice was low and menacing as he demanded that Violet come with him. Violet tried to remain calm, her voice shaking as she told him to leave and that she had a restraining order against him. But Donald was beyond reason. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful, and started dragging her towards his car. Violet struggled, screaming for help, but the street was deserted and her cries went unanswered. In a desperate bid to break free, Violet managed to pull out her phone and dial 911. The call connected, but before she could speak, Donald slapped the phone out of her hand, sending it crashing to the ground. Violet's panic intensified as she realized the severity of the situation. Donald's anger was palpable, his grip on her arm unrelenting. In a final desperate attempt to escape, Violet kicked Donald and tried to run. But Donald was faster and stronger. He caught up to her and, in a fit of rage, began to beat her mercilessly. Violet's cries for help echoed through the empty street, but no one came to her aid. Donald's fury was uncontrollable, and he didn't stop until Violet lay motionless on the ground. As the reality of what he had done sank in, Donald's rage gave way to panic. He looked around, realizing that the commotion could attract attention. He quickly dragged Violet's body to his car, his mind racing as he tried to think of a plan. He knew he needed to get rid of the evidence and cover his tracks. Donald drove to a remote area outside of town, a place he knew would be deserted at this hour. He put his hand on her neck. There was no pulse. He carried her into the woods, his heart pounding as he dug a shallow grave. He placed her body in the grave, covering it with dirt and debris. Donald's hands shook as he worked, the reality of his actions hitting him with full force. He knew there was no turning back. After burying Violet, Donald returned to his car, his mind racing with thoughts of how to cover his tracks. He disposed of her belongings, including her phone, and cleaned the car meticulously, trying to eliminate any traces of evidence. Donald knew that the police would come looking for him, but he was confident that he could outsmart them. Back at the shelter, the staff discovered Violet's absence and the signs of a struggle near the entrance. They immediately called the police, reporting her missing and providing details of her situation. The police launched an investigation, quickly identifying Donald as the prime suspect. The investigation was swift and thorough. Donald's history of abuse, the restraining order, and his known obsession with Violet made him the obvious suspect. The police tracked his movements, interviewed witnesses, and gathered evidence. It didn't take long for them to piece together the events of that fateful night. Friends and family were interviewed, providing crucial insights into the dynamics of Donald and Violet's relationship. Kate, Violet's closest friend, recounted the numerous times Violet had confided in her about the abuse. She shared the details of Violet's escape plan and their coded messages, revealing the extent of Violet's fear and desperation. Kate's testimony painted a stark contrast between the public image of the Dawsons and the dark reality behind closed doors. Rachel, Violet's sister, spoke of the early signs of trouble she had noticed in their marriage. She described Donald's controlling behavior and the gradual isolation of Violet from her family. Rachel's account of Violet's past trauma and her struggles to rebuild her life added another layer to the understanding of the abuse she had endured. During the interrogation, Donald initially tried to maintain his innocence, but the weight of the evidence was too great. His story unraveled under the pressure, and he eventually confessed to the murder. He described the events of that night with chilling detail, his voice devoid of remorse or empathy. Donald's confession confirmed the police's findings, solidifying the case against him. The community of Riverview was shocked by the revelations. The couple they had once admired and envied had been hiding a dark and twisted reality. The news of Violet's murder and the details of the abuse she had suffered sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. The unraveling of Donald and Violet's relationship, from the seemingly perfect marriage to the tragic and violent end, served as a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse. After several days of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Donald was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the community of Riverview could begin to heal. The murder of Violet Dawson was a tragic and heartbreaking event that left an indelible mark on the community of Riverview. The seemingly perfect couple, whose public life had been the envy of many, was revealed to have been hiding a dark and twisted reality.